Just tell me when. Okay, we're live, everyone. Good morning. You are at the Select Committee on Tribal Relations Committee hearing. Today is Friday, November 17th. We're going to do a call to order, roll call.
Senator Barlow. Senator Case is
Excused, perhaps participating later.
Representative Chestick.
Here.
Representative Penn.
Here.
Co-Chairman Oakley.
Here.
Chairwoman Ellis.
Present.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you so much. So something we like to do in tribal relations to kick off the morning is for everyone to go around the room and just introduce yourself and let us know if you're representing a particular organization. So we'll start over here with Mr. Harris. Thank you so much. And just a special thanks to PBS for broadcasting this meeting. We had some difficulty with the microphones yesterday, but I'm always impressed how they managed to work through those issues as quickly as possible. So thank you for broadcasting this. And also thanks to LSO, our unsung heroes. They do so much work to get ready for these hearings, preparing all the invitations that go out to people, getting all the meeting materials. So thank you so much for all that you do, LSO. This morning, the first item on our agenda is tribal charter schools. We have on our agenda some testimony from Dr. Lisa Grover, but I don't believe she's quite here or ready to participate yet. So we'll move on to the next person, which is Katie Law. For everyone who is paying attention to our agenda, yesterday the committee had the opportunity to tour the Wind River schools and really want to express our gratitude for everyone who took their time out yesterday to give us that tour. Tell us about what's going on in their schools with their students and their teachers. I think we really learned a lot. And so we'll just kind of continue that conversation this morning. So with that, Ms. Law, if you want to give us some thoughts about your school and just make sure when you testify, all the questions come through the chair, and introduce yourself for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. My name again is Katie Law. I'm the principal of Arapahoe Charter High School. This is my fifth and a half year as the principal. I've been with the district 17 years. So kind of since the charter school has been up and operational. I believe you guys all have a copy of the presentation that kind of goes through the history, but for those who can't see it, kind of just run through that. Arapahoe Charter High School kind of got its inception back in 2002 when the community came together to address some of the high dropout rates for the students within the boundaries of Fremont County School District 38. Typically, I guess in history, our district is a K-8 district. It did not have a standalone high school. So all of the students within the boundaries went to neighboring schools. Riverton mostly. Some went to St. Stephen's, Fort Washakie, Wyoming Indian, but predominantly Riverton. And through the course of just kind of looking at the success rate of Fremont 38 students, they found a big gap. So they wanted to do something to kind of intervene on that, specifically the high dropout rate. So they got together as a community and created Arapahoe Charter High School, which was actually originally called the Four Winds Charter High School. The doors opened to students in 2005. In that time, there was a blue building, which you all saw yesterday, that was in the process of being built, which is where we're currently located today. Per the charter, we accept 50 students, no more than 15 per grade level, so kind of whichever one comes first. We began the year with 50. We are currently at 47. So we had some shifting and some moving. One of no fault of their own, they moved. One, we had a transition plan in place, and the other just decided that school was not in his realm at the moment. So we're still sitting around 47. Over the course of the charter history, we've had some kind of ebbs and flows in our enrollment. A few years ago, which I kind of talked about yesterday, we had a drop in enrollment. So we had moved into this one classroom setting. Now we're back. We have taken a lot of energy and a lot of effort and a lot of initiative to increase the overall attendance at the school, and then the day-to-day attendance, that accountability piece. So that's kind of where we're at today. The student demographics that we have, which I've shared with you, and this is based on last year, we are an at-risk charter school. Most of our students do not fit the typical high school demographic for a variety of reasons. Our current demographics are 25% SPED, 15% are parents as students, and actually that number just increased a tiny bit. 18% qualify for McKinney-Vento. 100% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. 15% are involved in the criminal justice system or treatment facilities or probation. 39% is self-reported, experience substance or self-harm ideations. 38% have at least one semester gap in their education. And 70% of our student population have single parent households or and or a deceased parent. So it's a big task for the charter school to kind of balance out these different demographics and get students prepared for the next level, whatever that may be. Not many of our students go immediately to college right away. We gear them towards kind of three paths as our charter inception. It was kind of the goal there. We have a strong vocational component to that. Job Corps has been really vital to us when Job Corps came in, but the trade schools, college, I guess there's 4 tracks, straight to college, entering the workforce or military. So we kind of, when they come in as freshmen, kind of figure out what it is their goals are and gear them throughout their 4 years to what's in their best interest. A lot of student feedback goes into that, and a lot of parent involvement goes into that. Our goals and objectives for ACHS is to reduce the unacceptable dropout rate of students within the district. We promote Arapaho language and culture and traditions. We provide students with meaningful career and technical skills and whatever their post-secondary goals are, and to address the unacceptable dropout rates of students within our own school and the daily attendance. And that's kind of a big one for me. We talked yesterday about some changes within administration over the years, and our goals have always remained the same within the charter. The biggest thing I can say to our success right now and what we've seen over the course of my tenure there is that consistency among staff and administration. This year, we have seen a significant percent return to us. We haven't seen that mobility rate between the schools like we had in the past, and that just creates that consistent pathway, those expectations, and that accountability piece for keeping and maintaining that enrollment. Last year, we had the biggest graduating class in Arapahoe Charter history, which was 13. So previously, I think our biggest was 11. So we are making huge gains in that. Those 13 students left, so we had room for those few more, increased our enrollment about 15 from last year to this year. But we only had one student from last year that didn't graduate, that didn't return to us. So that's huge for us to create that kind of consistency and stability for the students. We're starting to see now a lot more students from 8th grade come to Arapahoe Charter High School instead of opting to other schools first, and then coming to us, which helps with the accountability piece on the state level side with graduation rates. Graduation rates are a huge one for us because our graduation rates per reported to the papers are pretty dismal. But that's because of how that graduation rate is calculated more than it is the numbers that we have. A lot of our students last year, let's see, 6 of the 13 were 4-year graduates, but only 2 of them counted for our graduation rate because they had attended other schools first. And don't really count in our cohort because they didn't start and end with us. So the way that that's calculated kind of gets a little weird when they come and go from other schools. It's hard to track that cohort. 3 of them were 5-year graduates and 3 of them were 6-year graduates. So they kind of count a little bit different, but when you get those hard numbers, numbers can be deceiving. Test scores are similar to that when students come and go from other schools. We don't always get records from like YTOP scores. And so we have these gaps in their scores that make it really difficult to report on what the accurate picture of the student looks like. But at the end of the day, and at the end of the year, 13 graduates or 13 students that have an opportunity to further their education or their livelihood in whatever capacity that looks like. So we're really proud of that progress. My big goals as a principal is the accountability piece for the attendance and kind of teaching that resiliency. There are a lot of problems that our students have, but that's not an excuse for why they can't attend school and be just as successful in school as their peers in other districts. So we work with them on that. We have the attendance rules that we follow. They sign contracts. We spend a lot of our day teaching that resilience piece and ways to work around whatever barriers they see to their education. For example, our students as parents, we have a daycare on site. So yes, this may be a very difficult thing for you to experience as a teenage parent, but that's not a reason that you can't get your education. And here we are to help you. And so we have those systems implemented. Transportation is a big one for us as well. If you miss the bus in the morning, that's not a reason to not be in school. Yep, your family doesn't have a car, you don't have gas money, that's great. We'll be there to get you. Those come with contracts. It's not just kind of a free for all. Doctor's appointments are another big one. Historically, we've had students that will miss an entire day of school because they have a doctor's appointment at like 8 o'clock in the morning. Nope, we're going to take you to those appointments. So we have agreements with Wind River Cares to be able to transport students to and from their appointments, and just kind of working with students on being there. And that has made a huge difference for our school as far as getting that education back on track. With those gaps in their education, the more that they're in school, the more that they're going to be able to catch up. We do a lot with the language and culture as well. We treat Arapahoe language like a core class. Every student takes that every year, even though it's only required that they have 1 credit of foreign language to graduate. Our school board and our students in our community have all looked at that as a vital piece. So they take it every year unless it interferes with their ability to graduate on time, is the only exception to opting out, so to speak, of Arapahoe language. We have Friday celebrations every week to identify student shout outs, bring in cultural pieces. Just Monday, actually, we had a guest speaker come to us, Christian Wasany, who actually plays on Yellowstone and Reservation Dogs. He's a motivational speaker, talked to them about understanding the importance of their identity as Indigenous people and the role that that can play for them going forward and kind of what's ingrained in them from that cultural side. So we bring in a lot of those pieces. For us as a school, it's just really important that students know who they are in order to know where they're going. So all of those pieces are things that we do at the charter school to just get those students, the community, the family buy-in. Let's see. We still have a ways to go, especially in the academic piece. But I have seen over my tenure there that consistency in the attendance, the expectations, the teachers from year to year, that we are seeing those gains. And those are reported throughout various state reports that we have, and also my end of the year charter report that is due in March every year. So that should be available through Elaine Mars's office as well. And so we are starting to see those gains academically when we get them there, when they can feel that belonging, that sense of belonging, that resiliency piece, and starting to overcome those obstacles that have traditionally kept them out of school. Our next focus then is going to be on that CTE, that vocational side, and getting back to that. That has changed through the course of the charter school as to what that vocational piece looks like. When I first started, it was primarily focused on construction type classes. But as you guys saw yesterday, our little blue building is not exactly set up for a giant construction class or auto shop or anything. So we have partnered with other schools. There are some barriers to that with the schedule. And that historically, that attendance piece, when you enroll students in CWC classes and dual enrollment, and partner with other schools, and attendance drops, that can become a problem to their success. So now we kind of took a step back a few years ago and said, well, let's fix this piece and then start to build those in again. So we're working on that currently. It's still a barrier to try and have those bigger options for students, like welding, auto shop, construction. We kind of did that outside in the canopy area in years past, which doesn't work in the wintertime. We're changing the focus now to things that we can do in-house with entrepreneurship, office procedures, career readiness, career exploration type things. We have childhood development and parenting that can lead to a certificate through the CTE programs as well. The big one that the community has always wanted is that culinary arts program. So that's kind of next on the list for me, is to figure out how to make that happen through either space. We are looking at expanding. We're building a track on our campus through the district that is for everyone, not just specifically the charter school. And with that, we're looking at bringing in some modulars. And that's going to be through our funds that we do that, to create that space to be able to expand our CTE and give them more of those practical life skills that can help them in their post-secondary, whatever that is. So where I'm at for time, actually. So yeah.
Madam Co-Chair.
Am I on? Check. You mentioned daily attendance as a goal, which certainly I think makes sense. What, if anything, do you think are some things that could be done in an effort to accomplish that? I mean, is transportation specifically? I mean, are there any metrics or specific things that we could work on as far as getting that daily attendance up, do you think?
Miss Law.
Thank you, co-chair. I think we're putting all of those into place right now from our end, and what we can. Things that we do is provide that suburban transportation for our students who miss that bus. One of the things that we've implemented a couple of years ago, actually around that COVID time, is students that need it can get phone cards. We do that for a couple of reasons. One is it has a hotspot. So if they don't have internet at home, they can power up their Chromebooks and do work at home. So that can help keep them on track. And through COVID times, did the virtual attendance, then they can actually call us for rides, or if anything else that they need. The things that we need to work on going forward are things within the tribal relations, working with Department of Family Services, the tribal prosecutors as far as enforcing the truancy. I have my rules and expectations. We have contracts and meetings and all of the things on our end. But if we are not getting that support from like the tribal prosecutors on enforcing that truancy and their rules as far as students being in school, then we don't have a lot of backing. So that's something that I'm working on currently, and have been for a while, trying to get a hold of people and figure out who everybody is still, is a work in progress. But that's kind of the biggest thing that we as a district need to do next, is work more closely with the tribal entities to work on those wraparound type services.
Any other questions, Representative Chestic?
Madam Chairman and Ms. Law, thank you for being here, and thank you for the tour yesterday. It was very informative, and I really enjoyed seeing your facility and seeing the students as they're moving about. It was a very, very rewarding experience for me. I do have a question, as a several-part question, actually. It relates to testing. And as you're aware, that on standardized tests, not just your school, but I think most of the schools on the reservation are underperforming as compared to schools that are not on the reservation. To what extent do you think that is a cultural problem, with the test not being geared towards the cultural needs of your students? And the second part of the question is, are there other metrics, other standards, other tests that we could use, or that you could use, that would be more culturally relevant to your students, that would have maybe a different result?
Ms. Law?
Thank you. Yeah, that's kind of a loaded question. I do see some struggles with students on testing because of the types of questions that are on there. We do practice like the modulars through YTOP, and kind of look at some of the questions. And when the students really struggle with that, we think of ways to change those questions, things that make it more about their surroundings. So change this place to something that they're familiar with. And they do tend to have a shift in their thought patterns there of like, oh yeah, this makes sense. If I just take whatever this math problem is, and instead of talking about things that I don't even know what they are, or am not familiar with on a day-to-day basis, change that to things that are more culturally relevant, geographically relevant, we do start to see that shift. One of the things that our district is doing right now, and have been for the last couple of years, is going through the PLC process, that professional learning community, and becoming a PLC school. So we put a lot of effort into that through Solution Tree is our big one. So we have people come in and kind of help us work through how to work together as a team. As Singleton, it gets a little bit hard. There's not two social studies teachers that can get together and kind of talk about what they're seeing in their classes. So they work with us on that. And we go to their conferences, and through that process, we build what we call CFAs, common formative assessments, and we create those. And when we create those with a standards-based approach that allows us that flexibility to create projects and questions that are more geared towards the way our students think and the things that they know. And it still has cut scores and rubrics to follow and everything else that is the accountability piece. What I do see, and going back to the test scores, that's hard for us to nail down on paper, is the way that the YTOP testing is done with high school. So they test in ninth and 10th grade, but the 9th and 10th, there's a science piece in 1 year and a writing piece in 1 year. So you only have kind of that 1 year to look at where our students are. And if they didn't go to school with us, we don't have that data. Last year was one that was a big one for us, where we were starting to see a lot of growth in proficiency and getting to that proficient level with our sophomores. Now that they become juniors, they don't YTOP test. So we see this kind of growth school wide, and then our juniors and seniors don't test on things that we can put together with a YTOP. So that data just kind of drops off, and then it goes into ACT, but there's nothing to compare that to. And then our seniors don't do any kind of state testing. So that does get hard to track, and it does kind of look like a little EKG monitor sometimes for us. But now that we are starting to get a lot more students that stay with us and come from 8th grade, we are starting to see that trend change. But through that CFA process is kind of how we're starting to create those standards-based approach to the cultural relevancy.
Additional questions? Representative Penn?
Chairman, I just wanted to say that I appreciated your passion yesterday when we were there. You said more than once that you believe in every kid that comes here, and I appreciate that. The other thing I appreciate is the fact that your discussion on working on resilience, and that you do still have high expectations. I think that both of those points are important, that these kids have high levels of high expectations, even though they're in situations that are very difficult. It's easy, and a lot of people, I think, fall into a trap where we have kids who are struggling, and therefore we're going to lower our standards. But I don't feel like you've done that, and I think that's very important, to have a place where they can come, where they feel supported, where they have high levels of emotional availability offered to them, so that they have that support, but also the expectations are still high. And I feel like that seems to be correlating into improvement in your score. So I just wanted to congratulate you on that.
Thank you.
Madam Co-Chair?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I guess just quickly, but I was interested in you saying that about the graduation rates, that if they went to a different school, they don't get calculated as a graduate. I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I'm interested in who's calculated. I mean, if they graduated, but they went to a different school, how is that not calculated as a graduate?
It's law.
Yeah. And I would have to go back and look at some things that are outside of my realm as a principal. But when I get that data, and we go through the graduation review, the way that the graduation, the raw data comes to me, is through that cohort. So they start them upon 8th grade, and they kind of put them together in a class and say these kids should graduate in 4 years together, through their next school of progression, which in our case is Riverton. And then when they start their freshman year, that's what kind of starts their cohort, and they track. So when they get those Wiser IDs and student IDs, they kind of go back and look at that and say, these kids started at Riverton. How many of these kids finished in Riverton within this 4 years? So there's a couple of different data pieces that you can find for the students that are just 4-year, no matter what school they go to. But the number that typically gets reported out to the newspapers are who starts in Riverton, who starts at Arapahoe Charter, who ends there in that 4-year time frame.
Madam Co-Chair?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you, Ms. Law. I guess, and I know the whole education world is its own thing, and I'm not privy to it. So I probably should know this, but I'm still confused. Like, who is the one that collects this data and then reports? Because I mean, it seems to me if they're just, unless it's reported, like, did you go for 4 years in Riverton and graduate in 4 years? I mean, unless the question is that, then that data would be completely off and wouldn't be helpful at all. In which case, if this is some state reporting agency, then we need to address it. I guess it doesn't make any sense to me that you're saying that what's reported is if you stay at the same high school for 4 years with the same people, then you're counted as graduated. But if you go to a different school, you're counted as not graduating. That wouldn't be helpful. That wouldn't be a helpful way of collecting information. So who is this? Who, when you say you get this data, who do you get that from?
I get it from the state. And so there are 2 ways to report that. and there is that kind of, these are the 4 years, these are the 4 years that started and ended with you. And that is through the 949, 950 state report. And I can definitely look into that more. I'm not an expert on that piece. That would be through the state agencies, and I can definitely reach out and get back with you on that when I get some more information on that. That was always the way it was explained to me. When Fort Washakie was a charter school as well, we used to have meetings together and would just kind of, this isn't indicative of where we're at with our school. And so I know there has been some changes in that reporting status. But our graduation rate last year was 18%. And with 13 graduates, that number is just not completely accurate. So I can definitely look into that and help you get a better understanding of that.
And then I just note, we also have LSO, Matt Wilmarth, I think will be joining us later today. And he put together a really good document that we'll dive into, and he might be a good person that can answer some of those questions for us as well. I wanted to ask a couple of questions, Ms. Law. So my first one is, I'm a little concerned about the transferring of the YTOP information. If you have any thoughts of how that could flow better, if that is like a particular district or school that's just unwilling, that's not okay, right? We need to figure that out. And then just the model that you're operating under. I know it's established as a charter through the school district, but what the work you're doing, it just seems so much like the work that alternative schools, high schools do in my community and in others. So have you thought about whether or not this charter continues to make sense, or does it make sense to try and convert to an alternative high school where I think some of these metrics of measurement on, for your graduation, I mean, they're altered, recognizing that there are children with different needs. And so I'm just curious if you've thought about whether or not the charter model you're in is the right one for you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Yeah, that conversation is currently in progress. There's a lot of talk among our community and our school board as to whether or not to unify, become a K-12 district, have our own standalone high school. That conversation is a tough one to have. Like, there's a lot of people that were very invested in the charter school from the very beginning that don't want to see the charter school go away. And I think there is some confusion among the community on what exactly a charter school is versus that alternative school. So that's kind of the conversation I'm having with my school board now, and kind of looking at what are the pros and cons to that. I'm definitely a proponent of the alternative model. The students that I've served over the years, the students that I've seen the most success with are those students kind of on that typical alternative model versus the charter model. I wouldn't work anywhere else, I don't think. I love my school. I love what we do. But changing to that alternative is definitely a focus in my mind. Opening it up to the unified district, so to speak, and having kind of a K-12 school doesn't serve the needs of the students that I have now. Kind of looking at some options there. So I know those conversations are up and coming. We have board roundtable with the charter school quarterly. So that next one is coming up in January, and they've asked me to kind of look at the pros and cons of that alternative model, the charter school model, and that K-12 model. So those conversations are happening, but my biggest thing is the community has to be involved in that decision, that can't just be us. As far as the YTOP, we're getting there. My relationships now with the other schools that I've been there so long, I am able to get a little bit more data. What typically happens is there's the transfer paper that only includes like immunization records and things like that. We check the box for all educational records, but some kind of shy away from that for FERPA reasons, which we've gone back and forth. Like, that is not a FERPA violation. Like, this is what we need for our students. Sometimes students don't have those. They didn't take the test. When I first came to the reservation, there were a lot of students who were not going to show a lot of success academically on those tests. and what I was told, although I can't verify any of that, it was prior to me, is that they would kind of, in a sense, be asked not to show up on test days. And I feel bad saying that because I don't know if that's true or shedding bad light on other districts, but that came to me a number of times. And I was like, you don't really need to take this test because it's not going to do our school any good. So there did seem to be a lot of truth to that in what I was receiving, although that's definitely changed. One thing that we are doing through the state is what used to be called YEdFi. And I don't know what it is now, but schools can opt into this program. We have, some of our surrounding schools have not, which is that exchange of information. So I can click on that little YEdFi button and I can go back and see anything that was input into that prior to them coming here. So that's a matter of getting that piece sorted out. It's fairly new. It's gone through some changes. They started it up. And then COVID hit. And so then it kind of fell by the wayside and now it's changed names. But if we can get the other schools in Fremont County on board with that, that'll make that exchange of information a lot easier.
Thank you, Ms. Law. I think we'll start trying to wrap up our conversation unless there's any other comments from or questions from committee members. Thank you so much for your time yesterday, for all the information you provided us. Please know, I think we'll be thinking about your comments, and what we're really looking for is if there are opportunities where we can support what you're trying to achieve, please let us know, because we care about these kids and share your concern about graduation rates and test scores, and not for the sake of the test score, but for the ability for those students to live productive lives where they're working in jobs where they have purpose and like what they're doing. I mean, that's the end goal. So thank you so much, Ms. Law. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for your time yesterday
Thank you.
and today.
Alrighty, we're going to backtrack and then hear some testimony. We have Dr. Lisa Grover from the National Alliance of Public Charter Schools to talk about Native American charter schools. And it's about 9:12. We're scheduled to end our discussion on tribal charter schools at 10. So we also have one other presenter. So I just thought I'd, 20 minutes or so, we'll hear from Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair and members of the committee. I apologize for arriving a little late. I thought it was 8:45, but nonetheless, we are here. And I appreciate the invitation to talk with you a little bit this morning about Native charter schools across the country. So next slide, please. The objectives I bring here today is one, to provide an overview of Native charter schools across the country. And then two, answer any questions and discuss how charter schools can help Native American students access more high-performing schools. Next slide, please. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and about the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. We are the leading national nonprofit committed to advancing the charter school movement. And while we are strong supporters, obviously, of charter schools, our vision is that every family can choose a well-funded, high-performing public school that delivers an excellent education for their children. So really what we are setting out to do is not just advance charter schools, but advance high-performing schools across the country for any student. I just wanted to add that charter schools are public, free, and open to all, but it seems like that's already pretty well known here. So I'm a parent. I put my money where my mouth is a long time ago. My children, Hannah and Kai, went to a charter school K-8, and then told me, Mom, we want to go to a different kind of school. So my son, who is now a sergeant in the U.S. Army Special Forces, graduated from a traditional district high school. And my daughter was the type of person, give me the lecture, I want to take the test. And she went to a private Catholic school. We live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, although our office is DC based. We are a remote office with folks from all around the country. My role is I am the Senior Director of State Advocacy and Support. We've been supporting our local Wyoming partners to with the emerging charter school movement with the two laws that were recently passed over the last 2 years, what we're seeing now is a few more charter schools enter into the public education system here. And quite honestly, Wyoming is a beautiful state. I enjoyed my ride up here yesterday, and I'm not just saying this, but some of the nicest people I've met in my work in the last 12 years. So I appreciate again being here. Next slide, please. So the data and overview I'm going to provide for you today is based on data from the 2018-2019 school year. Our database, which we upkeep for all charter schools across the country. How we define a Native charter school is at least 25% of the student population are Native students. And of course, Native students include Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian students. Next slide, please. So why charter schools and why charter schools and how they can help Native Americans access high performing schools? What we have learned in discussions around school leaders of Native charter schools is that charter schools and the growing movement around Native education is really part of the push against the history of boarding schools with Native communities and the suppression of Native languages and other ways of life, and of course, other injustices against Native communities. So what I have found in my home state of New Mexico, where we have 5 Native charter schools, it is a way for tribes to take control of their educational destiny and to help with tribal sovereignty. And so in talking with tribal leaders in my own state, this is what was the most exciting to them in forming charter schools. So next slide, please. And so really, part of the context here today is understanding the current growth and location. Serving Native students is an important part of your larger policy discussions on Native education and charter schools. And what I have here is, as I said, we have 5 charter schools in New Mexico, and this is students from the Native American Community College. It is a charter school that serves urban Native Americans and currently enrolls in Albuquerque about 120 students from the 21 tribes that we have in New Mexico. Next slide, please. So here, just some data for you. The latest data we have in our database is from the 2018-2019 school year. And what we see are 43 Native charter schools on reservations in 11 states. Next slide, please. And then we also count Native charter schools off of tribal land. And so there are 21 Native schools enrolling more than 25 Native students. And off of the reservations, or pueblos, as we say in New Mexico, but off of the reservations, this would include trust lands or census designated statistical areas that used to be reservation lands and no longer are. Next slide, please. So what that gives us is 64 Native charter schools that serve, roughly 9,700 students across the country. The states with the largest number of Native charter schools is Hawaii, followed by Arizona, and then followed by New Mexico. There are also Native charter schools in the states of Oklahoma, Michigan, Minnesota, California, Florida, again, Hawaii, New Mexico, and I'm missing my notes because I'm having internet issues, as far as a few other states. Next slide, please. So of the 64 Native charter schools that are currently in operation, only 10 self-report as having a language or cultural focus. I very much enjoyed the last presentation and hearing more about what the school does, and I was happy to hear that there is a language and cultural focus. The schools that I'm aware of in Arizona and New Mexico, most of them have a language and cultural focus. And this is not to say that the remaining charter schools do not interweave Native culture and language and self-identity and history into their curriculum. It's just that their focus is not language immersion or language immersion. And so what we see that this is an area of growth for Native charter schools. And I think there's a lot of reasons why we don't see more Native charter schools across the country, especially in states that have large Native American populations, which, you know, I could go into during the discussion that I hope will follow. Next slide, please. I wanted to show you, this is a video. I don't know if you all can play it or not, but perhaps it didn't translate. I wanted to show you how our Native American charter school that serves urban Native American students operates, but the internet does not seem to want to cooperate. Oh, no problem. No problem. I know we're tight for time, so that's fine. Next slide, please. I do want to say that we have two schools in New Mexico. One is on the Jemez Pueblo that currently occupies what used to be a boarding school for Native American students. And our school in Albuquerque is also housed in a building that was formerly a boarding school for Native American students. And so in talking to those tribal leaders and school leaders, it's really something that we celebrate very much, is having charter schools actually reimagine education from that terrible part in our nation's history with boarding schools for Native American students. So why Native charter schools? And, you know, the discussion before was very rich, and I've referenced this a little bit, but it's really about self-determination through education sovereignty. It is the autonomy to build schools that are rooted in Native American cultural values, languages, land practices, traditions, and ways of knowing. And then it also is another opportunity for tribes to blend the rich history of a Native American tribe with what we know about academic growth and social emotional learning. And it's really a way to revitalize and renormalize the Native ways of knowing, believing, and being. And I think that that's a very powerful statement for tribes to, again, to reclaim their self-determination and sovereignty through an education and a charter school that makes sense for that tribe. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just include a quote here from Senator Benny Shendo. He's a member of the Jemez Pueblo tribe. The Jemez tribe in Jemez Pueblo, slightly north of, well, it's about an hour north of Albuquerque. Senator Shendo was instrumental in pushing forward Native charter schools in New Mexico. And what we have done in our state is we have a Native American Education Act. And so what our charter school models do is blend the Native American Education Act with the charter school law to create these types of schools. And Senator Shendo is one of my heroes and one of my mentors, really. And again, instrumental in pushing forward Native schools in our state. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what authorizing looks like across the country for Native charter schools. Authorizers, again, are the entities that approve charter schools. Here in Wyoming, it is local school districts and the newly enacted Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board. So what authorizing looks like, these are, again, the entities that grant a charter to a group of founders. We find that 9 schools are authorized by independent charter boards. 11 are authorized by local educational agencies, in this case, school districts, obviously. 7 by SEAs. 2 schools are authorized by nonprofit organizations and community colleges. And then we've seen, and it's a bit surprising, it's discussions we've had in New Mexico, is it possible for Native American tribal councils or Native American community colleges in New Mexico, is it possible to have them become authorizers of charter schools? But currently, we don't see that around the country yet. Next slide, please. So Oklahoma and Wisconsin, of the 11 states, are the only two that allow tribes to authorize charter schools, either directly or through an agreement with the local school board. Wisconsin allows colleges, Native American community colleges, to authorize up to 6 charter schools between them. And Michigan recently, in the last 2 years, passed a law that also allowed tribally controlled community colleges and all community colleges to authorize charter schools. So Michigan, Bay Mills College, which is community college, formed by a tribal council, it is the only authorizer in the country that actually authorizes Native American charter schools. So again, it's an area of growth and perhaps something for you as policymakers to look at if the intent or leaning is to try to grow more Native charter schools here in the state. Next slide, please. And I include here, our research has shown that there is a large amount of financial resources, technical assistance resources to help Native charter schools grow across the country. This is just a few. I'm sure many in the audience are aware of some of these opportunities. There is more on the next slide, please. There are philanthropies, the Walton Family Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, and the National Indian Education Association that offer grants. I know that the Walton Foundation and the Kellogg Foundation are very, very interested in helping to establish and help fund Native charter schools around the country. So it's just something to look at if there are organizations or members here on the reservation that are interested in starting another charter school. And then I just wanted to give you the reference for the data, which you can find on our website, the data that I used today. Next slide, please. And please stay in touch. We're here as a resource for you. Anything you need from us. I do want to reiterate that our organization, we work in states where we feel we can add value to local partners. We feel very strongly that each state has to create and own their own charter school movement. However, we can provide any number of resources to help that occur here in Wyoming. And so this is my contact information, and reach out with any questions you may have. And I'm happy to stand for questions, Madam Co-Chair, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Lisa. I just want to thank you for making the trip to Wyoming.
Sure.
I actually need to be in Gallup tomorrow for a meeting, and I can tell you there's no easy way to get from Fort Washakie to Gallup, New Mexico. So thank you for making the trip, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you for being here. My question is kind of about the last couple of slides. So the last one were about, financial resources, of course. And then, and to tie that into the slides right before it, what I'm interested in, so a couple of slides before it were about authorizing. So it says like these 2 states, Oklahoma and Wisconsin, permit tribes to authorize Native schools. And then again, I've got this, the authorized language. But then I'm interested, so they authorize them, but then who funds them? And it sounds like there's a variety of ways which we don't have in Wyoming, but again, not that we couldn't, but so that's what I'm interested in. Are there actually, are there charter schools that are like independently funded, like, completely independent of the state? I just am interested in a little bit of the different funding mechanisms that you might see in other states.
Sure. Thank you, Madam.
Dr. Grover.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, Madam Co-Chair Oakley, and members of the committee. They are publicly funded through each state's funding formula, and then through any federal program grants that they may be eligible for. my understanding is that when a tribe starts a charter school or perhaps can convert, as in the case here, converts a traditional school to a public charter school, the BIA or BIA funding also goes away. And so it would be, other than, is it Title IX, the federal, is it Title IX funding for students on federal impact lands? I believe so, but I'm not sure. No, I'm actually wrong about that. But anyway, so they are funded like any other public school. But one of the issues we have faced, and again, just speak from my own experience in New Mexico, is one of the reasons we don't have more Native charter schools in New Mexico with 21 tribes is that when we do our funding calculations for Native schools, we found that there is a loss of funding if converting from a BIA or a BIE school, so it's something a tribe must consider very carefully. But in each of these states, they are funded through the regular student funding formula.
Representative Chestick.
Madam Co-Chair, and thank you for this presentation. Very interesting. You might be able to tell from the question I asked the previous witness that I am concerned about the standardized testing. I wonder if they're measuring the right things and whether they're measuring things that are useful to Indigenous people. So I have a concern about that. But I was very glad on one of your slides, you said that the Why Native Charter Schools slide, where one of the things that you think charter schools should emphasize are revitalizing and renormalizing the Indigenous ways of knowing, living and being. And I applaud that. I think that's great. I think that's something that we should encourage. I don't know, as a non-Native person, I don't really understand Indigenous ways of knowing, other than that that Indigenous peoples do have a very different way of looking at the world, in particular the natural world. Their relationship to science and natural sciences is very different than Western ways of looking, Western ways of knowing. But I worry that by emphasizing, and I think you should emphasize, Indigenous ways of knowing. I think that's a very valid way of interacting with the world and knowing about the world. But by doing that, are you increasingly putting those students at risk of doing worse on the standardized tests that focus on Western ways of knowing?
Dr. Grover.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair and Representative Shustek. That's a tough one, right? Because in many cultures, right, many state tests do not reflect the cultural values. So, for example, whether it's Hispanic students, Native American students, African American students, that's a tough question. If what we're testing in Native charter schools is not really reflecting, again, as you had brought up, Representative, the Native ways of knowing and their values and beliefs, and especially their relationship with the land. I don't know if there's appetite to re-examine assessments here in New Mexico, re-examine assessments here in Wyoming to make them more culturally relevant and connected to Native ways. Again, a tough one. As charter schools, and I had a conversation a few days ago with Miss Marces, Elaine Marces, and I encouraged her to allow the new statewide authorizing board to look at and push forward alternative assessments for the different kinds of charter schools. Because the saying is, if you've been to one charter school, you've been to one charter school. They are all so unique by design. It's one of the purposes of charter schools. And so I would suggest that perhaps as the authorizing board and local districts, as the emerging charter school movement begins to grow, to allow for alternative assessments and not just the state assessments, in order to capture what that charter school is doing, in order those alternative assessments would be directly linked to the school mission and vision. And I think it's another way we could look at performance of charter schools, and especially Native charter schools. So that would be my one suggestion. Thank you.
Questions? Senator Barlow?
Morning. Thank you for being here. So my question is, charter schools are very specific in their authorizing and et cetera funding model. So when you look at schools that fit the same definition, not publicly funded charter school, but 25% native populations, whether it be a non-charter school, public education system, the federal system, or private schools that some of these tribal nations may actually operate that don't fit, then what does the number become? Is there a number on that? Because right now we're talking about, I'm sorry, I don't remember the number, 60 something. 64 schools. Is it, if you took all of those other categories that, except for the funding model and authorizing component, would be or could be considered native schools with 25%, et cetera, what is the number of schools? And maybe that's data you don't actually collect or look at, but I'm just curious about that, because there's obviously other schools out there that are native schools except for the funding model component. So any background or any information on that? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Dr. Grover?
Madam Co-Chair Ellis and Madam Co-Chair Oakley and Senator Barlow, I do have that number of the total number of schools that are run by the BIA, the BIE, and then charter schools. I have to take off my glasses to read it. So the total number of schools from the Bureau of Indian Education is 183 schools. I forget the year in which there was placed a moratorium was placed on the growth of BIA schools. It's been at least 10 years, which is why we have not seen more BIA or BIE schools open. So that number is 183. 53 of those are BIE, the Bureau of Indian Education, direct operated schools. 3 are contract schools through the BIE, and tribal grant schools from the BIE is 127. And so roughly the total, if my math is almost 250 schools that serve a majority population of Native American students.
Follow-up, Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So that would be the federal government funding, but that doesn't include other school districts elsewhere in the country that might actually have that population mix, nor would it include private schools. Is that accurate?
Dr. Grover?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair and Senator Barlow. I don't have the number of privately run schools that would serve a majority Native American population. So I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not aware of any private schools that's primarily serve Native American students, and I hope I'm answering your question. Thank you.
Additional questions for Dr. Grover? Okay. Seeing none, thank you so much for this information, and again for making the trip all the way up to Fort Washakie. It's beautiful up here, but it's a bit of a hike, I know. So thanks so much. Safe travels home.
Thank you much, Madam Co-Chairs and members of the committee. And you're right, this is a spectacular part of Wyoming, and I'm really disappointed I don't get to go walk around Lander a little bit with all those great shops. But thank you.
Thank you. All right, next on our agenda, I think we invited a principal from the Ute Mountain Ute tribe to talk about the Quiyagut Community Academy. Are they online and ready to go? Great. Mr. Porter, welcome.
Uichgoose, Nunonia. Dan Porter, head of school at Quiyagut Community Academy. What I just said was good morning. My name is Dan Porter, and that's in Ute. And I'm a Mudugach. I am not Ute. Mudugach is the word for white. I'm old. I don't know the Ute word for old. So there you go. I guess what I'm trying to point out is you can learn new things, learn new tricks. And so if they can teach me some of the language, you can imagine what we're able to do with our kindergartners and first graders, second graders, third graders at this point. Our school opened in August of 2021. We are the first tribal public school located on tribal lands in Colorado. Our school is 15 miles from the nearest, their nearest schools are 15 miles away in Cortez, Colorado, and that's where the Ute tribe has traditionally attended over the last 50 years. It's kind of the same reasons this was brought up, put into existence, high dropout rate, poor attendance, just not serving our native kids very well. I am not slamming that district. I finished as an assistant superintendent in that district after 28 years and came out of retirement after my friends at the Ute tribe asked me to work at this school. So anyway, I kind of, that's the beginning of the school. I kind of want to just tell you, our goals are to learn academics, learn the things we need to know for these kids to be successful, but we are focused on culture to do that. Culture and language, we want to be competent. Community connections is a big deal, reestablishing and establishing what our community should look like, how we treat elders, those kind of things. And then character and wellness, high diabetes rate, lost a lot of people during COVID. And gosh, just lots of abuse of different things. And so we want to focus on character and wellness, and we're trying to do that through culture. So when I'm hearing some of the conversations, I just wanted to share a few thoughts. We have to have certain curriculums in Colorado for core standards, and certain curriculums are approved. And but we also are trying to be that sovereign nation that educates their own and educates it the way we see fit, and maybe it'll work better for our children. And so I'm just going to give you an example of one of the ways we're trying to do that. First of all, I want you to know 3 out of 4 of my classroom teachers are Indigenous. I have 2 Ute teachers, a Navajo teacher, and Mudugach. One of the issues that I think affects us when we're trying to do culturally things is we're trying to have Ute teachers. We want people to look like these kids, so these kids actually see somebody that looks like them in a classroom, an adult doing these jobs, and says, oh yeah, I can do that later in life too. And that's not something you see in Cortez. So here we are, but there's this paper ceiling that says, I need a teacher that's had a terrible education experience themselves to go on to college for 4 years to get a degree in that atmosphere. And I am very appreciative of charter schools having the ability to sign waivers and work around that, because if I was literally trying to wait for some of my Ute teachers to get those college degrees before they could get the official, we'd be in deep trouble. But quite frankly, my kindergarten teacher doesn't need college algebra to be able to teach kindergarten, and she's an amazing teacher. In the meantime, she is going to school. I'm so glad we don't have to wait. So that's a strong, I just want to make that point, that we've got to realize people can teach without everything being in place to start, and then we'll train them up. Well, I also wanted to share, we use one of the approved curriculums, or I shouldn't say curriculums, I should say programs in Colorado, is called Wonders. And so I just want to give you an example of how we try to use our culture and tie it in with what's approved programs. So Wonders has, in the 3rd grade, they've got a transportation unit that also focuses on what did this transportation mean to the United States in particular, and what changes. And so it's all about trains. So what we've done is taken and said, okay, that's the trains part. We'll go ahead and cover that in that curriculum, but what could we talk about that was significant for the Ute culture? And that happens to be horses. Spaniards bringing in horses in the 1500s, and all of a sudden the Utes' lives changed. And so we have I guess a parallel lesson because we do both, and it talks about the horses. Kava is I've learned Kava because I'm helping teach a student that needs a one-on-one this unit. Kava is the horse, and so we kind of say what were the pros of horses by the end of this unit? What were the cons of horses? Cons were a lot more battles, lots more fights, because they were running into other lands with other tribes. The positives were they could, hunting wasn't so arduous. They could haul buffalo. They could pull teepees now that were heavy, those kind of things. And so when you talk about how do you use culture, yet still try to hit those core standards that we're required to have, those expectations, that's how we're doing it. One of my mentors when I was younger said, you know, you can't teach a kid something if they don't have a hook in their mind to hang it on. You can talk about escalators all day long to these kids, and most of them aren't going to get it because we don't have an escalator. I don't even think there's one 4 hours from us in Grand Junction. It'd be about 5 hours in Albuquerque. So until they've seen an escalator, they're not going to have a hook on their brain to hang any information on. So we tie it. They've seen a lot of cowboys around here. They haven't seen a lot of trains. So it's that type of thing that we're doing. Some of the battles that I've heard the previous principal talk about, I thought attendance would be fixed if we had a school down here after 25 years in Cortez, and attendance being a huge issue. I thought, well, that'll solve it. We'll be right there at the tribe. And guess what? It didn't solve it. I still have attendance issues, and transportation has been the answer to that. We go door to door to pick up children that do not show up on time, and that has made the difference for us as attendance. That is improving attendance. So that's a big issue. Our other issue is we don't have any taxing base. We want to build a school here. We want to have a real brick and mortar school. We're in a 1950s Army trailer that we're very happy to have, and it's been refurbished, and we've got a real nice facility. But all the surrounding areas, whether it's Mancos, Dove Creek, Dolores, Shiprock, they all have public schools that are built using a tax base. We don't. And so how do we get that built? That's a huge expenditure. Those are issues. Other issues are you've got the state, even boiling down to what your fiscal year look like. We run different fiscal years for tribal budgets to state budgets, and then trying to match those up. I mean, so everything seems to be a little bit of a struggle, but you know what? It's well worth it. I can give you an example. I've got a student that came from Cortez because of behavior issues. And sure enough, he started having a behavior issue. And about 3 minutes into my discussion with him, I realized this is a thing he's already seen, having to talk to a white guy about what's going on. I just went and got one of my pairs. We have lots of Native Americans working for us, Ute specifically. I asked her, within 3 minutes, he had come in the building. He was willing to talk to me. And it's that coming from a different way. And that's kind of hard for me. I mean, I'm Western educated. by gosh, this is how we're going to do things. And I'm really having to change my views on what will reach these children. So we have a student that in Cortez basically was on the verge of expulsion. And he's working here because he's closer to home. Family's closer to home, and he sees a lot of people around him that are like him. He realizes that he doesn't feel so alone. I don't believe. So those are real positives with us. One last story. I had a parent in my first year come down 2 weeks into school. Her student was not at my school. She asked if she could talk to me. She's crying. And she had terrible experiences as a child in our schools in Cortez. She was afraid to walk in that school and talk. And so she was even afraid to walk into my office down here at Toyoc and talk to me. Her student, I said, absolutely, we've got room for your student. They had forgotten to put her on the bus two days in a row. She was at school, kindergartner, nothing, and it takes 40 minutes to get, find somebody and then get them up there to pick up a kid. So we put her in school. And my point is, not only is her student excelling, this is 3 years on, and doing well and a leader in her classroom, but that parent who first time I met could hardly speak to me, she was so shy, is now on my accountability committee. She organizes our parade last year, which we, not the parade, but our entry into the parade, which we won, I am happy to say. She is a leader and a leader of parents. And that's the other thing I feel really proud of, is we're teaching our parents their role in education and that they have power in education. And they don't have to be afraid to walk in the door just because they don't feel like they've ever been well educated. So I know we're short on time, but those are the things, as I was listening to other people talk about, that I wanted to share with you.
Mr. Porter, thank you so much for your testimony. Questions from committee members? Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to just kind of echo, if nobody's going to ask questions. I think you dig into this stuff kind of, we've now heard from 3 people, and you kind of start mentally wrapping your mind around it a little bit, right? And which is important. And I just really appreciated your testimony. It was just gives real good insight. So I appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Porter, I have a question. And I've looked at, toured a lot of charter schools, read a lot about charter schools. I used to live in Colorado where, charter schools, there are hundreds of them. Wyoming, we've really, it's been a slow simmer to get some charter school conversation going. But one thing you repeatedly hear is that the success of a charter school really depends a lot on parental involvement. And so when you talk about how you're teaching parents to be advocates in their kids' education, to provide a welcoming atmosphere for people who maybe don't have a lot of education, I'm just wondering if you could talk on that a little bit, because I think even outside of the reservation, certainly in my community, this is a key piece that parents need to feel involved and welcome. And I think that's the only way that this really works. So I just want, if you can elaborate on how you started breaking down some of those barriers to get more parents showing up and being involved.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. When I look back on that and I try to put my finger on those things, I think larger districts struggle for several reasons. One of them is absolutely going to be the COVID. We're not letting anybody in school, drop your kid off, nobody come through. A lot of schools have held that over for several reasons. One, they've now got security doors and everything for security. You can't just let people in your buildings. And so that old day feeling of, I'm going to walk my child to class and I can get to talk to the teacher this morning, and the teacher can share that 30-second tidbit. Oh, you should have seen what they did yesterday. Or, oh man, you should have seen what they did yesterday. However that works, that's gone in a lot of these big schools. That is the beauty of our place. We do have security. We have it designed so that we can see who's coming in the door before we buzz them in. But we are not so large that we can't buzz people in. And it is truly a community raising these kids. It'll be a grandma one day and auntie the next. We have many, many deaths. And so lots of different people are raising these children. That lets those parents know, I am welcome in this school. I can walk in this school. I can go down and take my child to class in this school. That has been a huge advantage. And so the struggle is for these bigger schools is, how can you provide that ability? The other thing that we're having to overcome is, and I mentioned it, were such terrible experiences with the Cortez schools for these parents that are now parents going, this didn't work for me. I don't want to walk through that door again. I didn't like school. We are overcoming that just through sheer trust and getting to know the parents and that kind of stuff. That's the only way to overcome that, is develop those good relationships. And we're able to do it because we're small. And having an elder that's also one of my bus drivers stand beside me and tell somebody this is an okay Mutagach, you wouldn't believe what that does for folks. I mean, I hate to say it, but they're my ticket in to being able to say, I truly care about your child. We truly care about your child. Your child is seen and heard and believed in. And that's something we go from a pedagogy of compliance to a pedagogy of belief in the child. We're not just doing this because we have to do this. We're not doing education to you. We're doing education with you. And it's, I'm 3 years into it, and I can't tell you, oh gosh, everything was great within 2 months, but 3 years later, people are now seeing the school as other than a school. They will come in and say, hey, they're trying to kick my high schooler out of school. Can you give me some advice? Hey, I need stuff for Christmas. How do I get on that Christmas tree? Those kind of things, people are coming in. We are becoming a community resource, and that's part of our goal as well. So getting those parents involved, start with baby steps, spoon feed, and walk them through it. Don't just say, I need you to do this. I want you to be on my accountability committee, and leave something. You sit with them and do it with them. And we're very lucky to have the time to do that.
Any other questions for Mr. Porter? Okay, seeing none. Thank you so much for spending your time with us this morning, and certainly reach out if there's something you wanted to share with us that may come across your mind later today where you said, oh, I should have told him that. Please let us know.
That'll be at 3 a.m. If you're up, I'll call you.
I probably will be. So
okay.
I don't sleep a lot. Okay. Thanks so much. Okay, committee. We are at it's 9:56. We're going, any public comment on tribal charter schools?
Children, that maybe a little bit of the history is a little bit off. That obviously the charter school at Arapahoe was created once the legislature passed the law regarding charter schools. I think at that time the law is not the most progressive in this country. The idea was that we needed a charter school because our public schools are failing our children and our communities. They still are. The charter school hasn't changed that. It's probably actually made it worse. As she was saying, and as it was alluded to by your committee, that the charter schools become she said it's just for kids that are at risk. It wasn't created for at-risk kids. It was supposed to be because we had 2 districts at that time, 21 and 38, that had no high schools. At the time, Senator Case and the committee, when they pushed for District 21 to be K through 12, they should have just added 38, but they didn't. And I was making those comments that they should. And here we are, 20 years later, with District 38 being the only K through 8 district in the whole state. That's a legacy of when every community controlled their districts, and we had elementary school districts and high school districts, and that should go away. District 38 needs to be a K through 12 district, and we didn't take a vote, right? District 21 citizens didn't take a vote and say we want to be K through 12. The legislature just did it, and the same thing. I feel like you're not going to get that vote, or you're not going to get that opinion from the community to go K through 12. You just need to do it. In a line, there's no good reason why our district is not K through 12, and it affects our kids. Of my 6 kids, 4 of them are now adults. Actually, my oldest son, youngest kid of those 4 is now a freshman at the University of Wyoming, in the business school. Not because the schools were great or did an excellent job. We feel because we had to homeschool. We homeschooled each of our kids half their careers, and we're not teachers. My wife and I, we felt like we did a terrible job as homeschoolers. But 2 of my kids, one's in Texas A&M as an engineer, and he's at UW, and all those 4 oldest ones all graduated from high school. they all had to go to Riverton schools. That's the problem that Katie Law mentioned, is that when they go over to Riverton, there's no advocacy for them. They don't have a home district. They're like foreigners in their own lands. They get treated like they don't belong. They're constantly and my kids are high performing. We're not, talking about disadvantaged kids. We're talking about kids that go on to college are treated like that they don't belong there, and that they could be gone anytime if they misbehave. And that's wrong. Like I said, those kids should have a high school to go to, and there should be no question about it. And I think that at the time the legislature was being cheap with didn't want to fund a high school because they had to build those high schools. They built one at Fort Washakie. They really haven't built one here. And so I think that my two kids that are in college at Riverton High School, their counselors said, you need to go to do you need to go do a menial job, go look at the trade schools. My daughter, she's at Texas A&M, she got accepted at Georgia Tech and Texas A&M, the two of the top 5 civil engineering schools in the country, because she studied civil engineering when she went in. And her counselor at Riverton was saying, go to a trade school. And to me, this is ridiculous. Is that as parents, we have no advocacy. Our district isn't advocating for us with District 25. And we don't know the financial arrangements that the districts make amongst themselves when our students go to Riverton. It's like they're treating us like it's an honor to go over there, and that we're being allowed to go to their schools, and that's not right. And so, like I said, so really, like I said, talking about charter schools is really important, because our charter school really needs to be a true charter school. The point is, and I'm glad the legislature is having that conversation about funding private schools, because initially I was against that when this same committee supported, back when Senator Case was in charge of the funding of St. Stephen's Indian School. I was against it because to me, St. Stephen's is a private school, and I was against private school funding at that time. When the legislature decided to fund it millions of dollars a year, or over $1 million a year for who knows how many years now, I was against it. But now that turned me into an advocate of it, because it is a private school. And so whether it's federally funded, doesn't matter. It's a private school, because not every kid can go. Any citizen just can't go to St. Stephen's Indian School. Even to this day, you have to be Native American. And I think that's not correct. And so so I support the voucher. It's not perfect, but because we've sent our kids also out of our pocket to St. Margaret Catholic School. Our youngest son's a student there now. And the unfortunate thing is it's only K through 5. And they eventually have to do something after he goes through 5th grade. He'll have to go to Riverton schools again. And that's an issue, because again, we don't vote for their school board members, so we have no advocacy there. And so I just say that the reason why we have a charter school is because our schools weren't doing well for our kids, and they're still not. And so the charter school still isn't. My daughters, my one that's in Texas A&M, and her sister, who both graduated from Riverton during the COVID, went to Arapahoe Charter School, not because they were at risk, but because they had nowhere else to go. That's where they wanted to go. So we got them there. And the reason we pulled them out was because their grades, their system, their electronic system of keeping track of grades screwed up their transcripts. So when they went over to Riverton, they had to repeat classes, and it was just a mess. And so again, they're not doing good for our school. No matter how much culture is there, culture belongs in the family, not in school. Me and my wife, as Native parents, teach our kids our culture in our home. We don't need them to go to school to learn the language or how to be Arapaho. That belongs in the home. And so so I get that schools want to do those these days, but schools aren't social services. Schools aren't meant to be social services agencies. They're meant to be educational agencies. And so with the testing, it's like our students are excellent because we expect them to be excellent. Not and the test doesn't there's no the experts say that natives learn different than non-natives. To me, it's like give them the same test, you have the same expectations, they're gonna succeed. And we force our kids to succeed. And so and you're right, it's the parenting. That's ultimately what it becomes. When I was in school, my parents, we were the poorest of the poor. My mom probably made $2 an hour living in a city, but we made the parent teacher conferences. Nowadays, you got to give them gas cards and feed them dinner for them to even come and see the teacher. I think that's wrong. I think we've been very lax with our requirements in school, and they're just getting more lax and more lax. That's not going to solve anything. But ultimately, if the schools don't perform, we need to replace them. Like I said, in sports, we have our lovable losers, right? Some of these teams that they just never win. But we can't have our lovable losers as school districts. Each of our communities loves our school districts, but they're losing and they're failing our students. It's like, so they need to be revamped, replaced, and you can replace them with charter schools. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Cardenas, if you could just hang on for 1 second. Any questions? We have Ms. Penn or Representative Penn.
Madam Chairman, couple of things. Thank you for your testimony. I agree with a lot of the things that you say. I agree with your comments on culture and the family. And I also agree that schools are not social service agencies. I think that's spot on. I might push back one little bit on the trades. I think trades are great jobs at this point. That's lacking in much of our society, and I wouldn't consider trades to be a menial job. Certainly it could become that, but it can also be great. I guess my question for you though is, what do you feel like the high schools and being a united school in that way rather than charter school, what do you feel like your kids would have gained from that? Because I feel like right now we're kind of having this conversation, and not just on this committee, but throughout education, that people like yourself feel like the schools are failing our kids. And so it seems like we're kind of re-looking at the idea of a charter school because of that fact. But it sounds to me like maybe you're feeling like the charter school is not the answer. So I guess, what do you feel like the high school sending your kids to Riverton or having Arapahoe be a real high school rather than charter, what would they gain?
Mr. Cardenas.
Oh, thank you, Representative Penn. I think again, it's the advocacy, right? I mean, like I said, we just don't get service properly if from the other school districts. I just use Riverton as an example because that's where my kids go. I don't know how it is, but in Lander or Wind River schools and Pavilion, our kids go all kinds of different places. But I think that it's the ability to go to your representative, your school board member that you voted for or that you supported, and go to them directly and advocate. Like I said, when the kids get up to 8th grade, they've got to decide to go somewhere, and it's like I said, that we lose that. I think that's the main thing, is the ability to have that advocacy. And I feel like it's really, like I said, it's a complex issue. A lot of folks were here where we live on the reservation. We really support sports, right? We expect our basketball teams to be every year to be the state championships, but we don't expect our kids to be champions of the spelling bee or the science fair. And I think there's a problem there. I think that's wrong. Part of me wants to get rid of the sports out of schools and just focus on academics, but that there would be uproar on the reservation and a lot of our small communities as well. But to me, it's like, but directly to answer your question, it's the direct advocacy that we get from our school boards. We lose that when our kids go over to other school districts, and we have to put in like twice as much time with our kids to advocate for, if they're having trouble, right? If my 4 kids that have graduated. Everybody was excellent. They went to school. They didn't enlist. They listened. Didn't talk back. Didn't miss school. But our fifth child, she's at Riverton and she's having trouble. She's a different person. But dealing with the school when your kid's not performing at 100%, which is disturbing to us because we expect excellence and this is not happening. And so we don't know how to react. And we're not getting services. Like I said, I think it's direct services from the what you would normally get from a normal high school that don't exist. So we don't have that. And nobody ever explains to us or any parents, like, how does the system work when your child after K2 through 8 has to go somewhere? Who's responsible? Like, we're just in this gray twilight zone that shouldn't exist, right? When our kid is like I said, you guys are truancy. What after K through 8 and the 9th grade doesn't go or it messes up? Who's responsible? District 38 or there? If I didn't send my kid and didn't feel like sending them, who's going to be the one that ultimately is going to be responsible? And that just, there's too many questions in this current system. I mean, I'm not saying it's simple for the legislature to unify the school district, but they really should have, right? When they did it with 21. But hopefully I answered your question. I don't think I did, but apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Cardenas. I think we're good. We're running a little behind schedule, but I did want to more public comment on tribal charter schools. And we're starting to take away time out of our sales tax discussion. So we're getting behind, but if anyone wants to offer some brief remarks, we can do that. Please come up.
Hello, everybody. My name is Yufna Soldier. Thank you for letting me come up. I won't take too much of your time. I just wanted to say I'm a generation of boarding school survivor. My mom and father both went to St. Stephen's Indian School when it was a boarding school. And one of the things about that is I did go to school at St. Stephen's Indian School, the high school. I graduated there. One of the things about that is we didn't have the charter school at that time in 2001 from the times that I graduated. St. Stephen's Indian School is just that. It's an Indian school. I graduated with 8 to 12 people, some of them super seniors at that time. And then one of the things from my experience that I kind of wanted to make sure is kind of in your perspective is that here on the reservation, there's a lack of resources as far as education, healthcare, housing, transportation. It's not here. We see all this tax money go away out of here, but it never comes back. Taxes and education might be two different issues right now for two different bills, but it's close to home. It hits close to here because we live here. I have 3 students who go to school at St. Stephen's Indian School. I have a senior in the high school, and we were deciding, do we send her to the charter school? Or do we keep her at St. Stephen's? Because a lot of funding was taken away from St. Stephen's within the last couple of years. So one of the things about that is, for me, I had a really traditional upbringing. My cultural identity and my language was really important to me. It made me who I was. I finished my Indian law degree from Oklahoma University last year. And so my children see me, they saw me go to school, they saw me struggle. And I tell them every day, you need to get up and go to school. It's law, but they don't want to be there, right? They saw COVID, you could be on Zoom, whatnot. But my main point in all of this was just bringing that perspective to you that I'm sure you toured the reservation yesterday. I'm sure you saw that we're lacking those resources, whether it's education, healthcare. The other thing too is I would love to see my tribal leaders sitting here from both tribes. They're really highly prestigious. A lot of them are elders. It would be great to see them sitting here in their own table. We vote for them. They're our leaders. That's who we voted for this past couple of years. So to be on that even keel and know that they're sitting in the audience is kind of odd for me, but I just wanted to say that it would be great to see them here, show them and empower them, and be respectful of their power that they have here on the reservation. And what they say is, our chiefs and our people from both tribes, they speak for us. And if they don't have that voice, they're powerless. And so I appreciate you guys all being here and let me be able to talk. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Soldier-Wolf? Thank you for talking. I want to address the seating arrangement. We in prior years have met in the intertribal council headquarters, we've had opportunities where we sit together. I think there is concern that, obviously the tribal council members don't want to sit here necessarily for 2 days when they have other work to attend to for their council. And so there was concern about the empty chairs being perceived negatively. And so we're just doing our best. We really are. And you'll notice on our agenda, whenever we ask the council members to testify, it's at their request. We know the limits of our sovereign authority over their sovereign authority. We can't make them come testify. So I just want to address that. We're trying to be respectful. And I think no matter what you do, you can be taken a different way. So I just want to say, like, we really are trying to be as respectful as possible and how we have this room set up. So
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, committee, with that, I was hoping we might get a break in there, but I don't think we have time. So if people need to get up and use the restroom, please do so. But I do want to move into our next discussion about sales tax. So we have 2 bill drafts. I don't know how we should proceed. Maybe we'll have Lily go through each draft. And these were responses to the ongoing discussion we've had about online sales tax collection. And then from there, maybe we'll hear from Director Henson from Department of Revenue. And then we have Wind River Tax Commission members I know in the audience who would like to testify. So we're looking for some guidance, but Lily, how about you go through the bills to kick us off?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. At our last meeting, the LSO was directed to prepare 2 bills. Both of them were related to sales. And when I say sales tax, I will be referring to both sales and use tax. And so you directed us to prepare 2 bills relating to purchases made online, but sourced to the reservation. And that's sourced is just the language used in the statutes to know that there are purchases made online on the reservation. The first bill was a bill to completely exempt online sales from sales tax. The second bill was a bill to distribute the sales and use taxes that are collected on the reservation for online purchases to collect those and then distribute those back to the tribes, and to do so based upon an agreement with each tribe. So the first bill I'm going to go through is 24 LSO 319-0319 draft, and it's version 4. This bill is the first bill that completely exempts remote sales from remote sales. And again, so the statutes use the word remote sales versus online sales, but it's to completely exempt remote sales on the reservation from sales tax. And the way it's written that's exactly what it does. But when we talked to the Department of Revenue, we were made aware that there is a federal Internet Tax Freedom Act, and that act prohibits the state from discriminating between online sales and in-person sales. So what I'll do is I'll walk through the bill and then show you what we worked with the Department of Revenue to come up with an amendment that would correct that discrimination. So what that means is that you can't or a state cannot say we're only going to tax online sales or we're only going to tax in-person sales. Those taxes have to be you have to tax both similarly. So I'll walk through the bill draft. On page 1, we have again an act relating to page 1, line 1. This act is relating to sales and use taxes, and I'll go back. First, I'll go through the bill, and then I'll go through the amendment if you want me to, Madam Chairman. So it originally, without any amendment, it provides for an exemption for remote sales taxes on the Wind River Indian Reservation. If you go down to line 11, where we have 39-15-104, that second number 15, 39 is basically the sales tax, or is the tax title. 15 relates to the chapter, and that's referring to the sales taxes. So if you go to page 2, this is what this is actually saying is just these are the following I'm just going to walk back. In 105, 105 sets forth all the different sales taxes, how they'll be distributed. And then what we're saying is we're going to go all the way down to adding a paragraph 11. So that will be on page 2, line 4. And it just provides that sales and use taxes from remote sales. And when it says on page 5, it says personal property admissions or services from remote sellers under 39-15-501. That statute refers to remote sales, and it just says that they will be exempt from sales and use taxes. And then we'll go down to, now if you go down to line 8, 39-16-105, that's your use tax section. So 16 is your use tax chapter, and it in essence just says the exact same thing. That will go down to line 13. It's adding a new paragraph, and it just says purchases of, again, tangible personal property, admissions or services from remote sellers will be exempt from sales and use taxes. So before I go through the amendment, are there any questions right there?
Thank
Okay.
you for that.
So, but what that does then, the problem with that, and we'll have the Department of Revenue on who's the expert here. But when the Department of Revenue looked at that, they said, well, what you're doing is you are exempting sales and use, or you're exempting online purchases made sourced to the reservation from sales and use taxes, but you're not exempting in-person sales and use taxes. So we can't actually do that because we're treating in-person taxes differently from online. And again, when the Department of Revenue comes on, they can explain this more. But if you were to go online and buy something remotely from Target, that is not actually treated as a remote seller because they have stores located in Wyoming. So it just creates issues. So what we have in there, it's in your agenda, is the Department of Revenue's suggestions for correcting this bill draft. And it's in your, do you have it? It looks like this. Okay. So this is a suggested amendments, and we'll go back through what those amendments would do. If we're on page 1 of 319, if you go to the second line, this right now it says that this would provide for an exemption for remote sales. So we would replace the word remote with certain. So it'll provide an exemption for certain sales that are sourced to the reservation. Then go on to page 2, line 4, and I'll just read it, what it would say instead of reading the whole amendment. The amendment would just change the language on lines 4 and 5 to say sales of tangible personal property sourced to the Wind River Reservation. So all tangible personal property sourced to the Wind Reservation would be exempt from sales and use taxes. Now and again, when the Department of Revenue comes on, there's a lot of different types of taxes that are on the reservation, but that are sourced to the reservation. But this would cover really most of the remote sales that are sourced to the reservation. And so it will still, we believe it will still get to what your purpose was, is to most of those remote sales. But even here, then it would be, if you buy something from Target, it'll still be exempt from taxation. And then if we go down to line 13, 14 and 15, it'll be the exact same thing. And again, all we're doing is we're saying the same language for use taxes. So even though you may not have it may not be well, use taxes are taxes that aren't actually purchased, but it's not a sales. Sorry, I'm not saying it very well. A use tax is it's almost a type of sales tax. So it'll just say purchases of tangible personal property sourced to the Wind River Reservation. So that's basically, it's a pretty simple bill. It just exempts sales and use taxes that are sourced to the reservation. Oh, for personal property.
Thank you, Lily. I think we have a Department of Revenue online testifying, so if we could. Oh, I thought they are completely opposite. We'll do these, I guess, separately, but I think what the committee might be thinking about is I don't think it makes sense to move both bills forward. I think if we were going to do it, it'd be one over the other. So we'll hear from Department of Revenue on this bill though.
Hello, good morning, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Director Fanning, please, or Administrator Fanning, please proceed.
All righty, thank you. So Chairwoman Ellis, Miss Co-Chair, Members Committee, Brett Fanning, I'm the Excise Tax Administrator at the Wyoming Department of Revenue. Director Henson, she asked me to speak on the department's behalf related to these two bills. So the first bill that we've been talking about, so 24 LSO 0319 Working Provision 4, as Ms. Sharp noted, we did have some questions, maybe some concerns even related to this bill, and she outlined it very well. So if you're going to treat online vendors differently than you're going to treat brick and mortar, that goes against the Internet Tax Freedom Act. And that's back from the 1990s. There's been a couple of versions of the past, but that's kind of where we're at. It's generally to treat, you can have exemptions however you would like, but that medium of the transaction, so what I'm saying, e-commerce versus in-person, that's where this distinction kind of comes in. And so I know that we have brilliant legal minds on this particular committee, and so that may be something that you guys can dive into further if you would like. So my question related to this, and Ms. Sharp too, she really did a good job in outlining it. She's right with the Target example. So in our system, we do separate out different license types. So if you are a remote seller, we do have a way in our system to categorize it a little bit differently than someone who has a physical location within our state. We can do that. But we do have brick and mortar stores who now really have a major online presence. And kind of like the Target is a really good example. And there's other big box stores located in Riverton, Lander, Thermopolis, and Du Bois that would also fall into the same category. So I'm not quite sure, based on the draft before the amendment, the department can administer this. And so again, talking about exemptions, that's way outside my realm. I'm just here to talk about if I can administer this per your intent. And I've been having discussions, I've been involved in these discussions for quite a while now, so I kind of understand maybe the initial intent. That's why we worked with LSO. And when we talked with Streamline, we did have conversations with them to see if they could do this. They said this kind of online bill draft is going to it's going to bring on some legal challenges for you. But one of the things that you can do is that you can exempt everything on the reservation. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to make policy determines what's bit, or you can exempt via an entity tribal members throughout your entire state. So those are kind of the topics here that we're kind of trying to discuss. And so I don't know if that necessarily helps. The difference between this bill and what's happening right now. So remember, my testimony in previous meetings is that there is already an exemption for tribal members on the reservation. The difference is we're not quite sure if all of the tribal members are claiming the exemptions that they should be. That's why I'm here talking in front of you today. This bill 0319 shifts that burden. right? So instead of the tribal member having to determine if they've got to provide an exemption, this makes the vendor responsible for exempting those. So I think that's kind of the intent of what this committee has tried to do, is shift that burden. And I don't, burden's not a bad word in this case. It's not whatsoever. It's just now the retailers, if they're coming onto the reservation, that's that difference here. And I think that's important to note. The last thing I had is the boundaries of the Wind River Reservation. We don't have those in our rules, and I know that's always a topic of discussion. But I think those are kind of the state's just general concerns. And so with that, I'll close out my testimony on this bill and stand for any questions you may have for me.
Thank you, Director or Administrator Fanning. Representative Chestic.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Fanning, and maybe also LSL can weigh in on this. I have a question. I think it might also apply to the next bill, draft 320. And that is, what is the definition of sourced to the Wind River Indian Reservation? My concern is that, especially for the 319 draft, what if a non-native person from Lander just decides to go to the Shoshone Rose for the afternoon and goes online and places a lot of orders? He's dialing in from the reservation, physically on the reservation as he's making his orders. Is that transaction now exempt from sales tax, where it would have been taxable had he done it from his home in Lander?
Administrator Fanning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great question, Mr. Representative. The answer is yes. This bill as currently written, there would be an exemption there. I think, and I remember from past conversations on this, this kind of takes out that two-part test from the United States Supreme Court, saying it had to be on the reservation and then you had to be a tribal member. So yes, this would provide for an exemption for any sales that are sourced to the reservation. Now, Ms. Sharp did a really good job in outlining sourced versus made. They are very similar in nature. Sourced is just how it appears in our sourcing statutes. And so that's just a point of clarification. But yes, anything shipped onto the reservation with this current bill draft, there would be an exemption because it removes that qualifier of you having to be a tribal member.
Administrator Fanning, I want to make sure I get this straight. Representative Chestig's example was the non-Indian goes and makes the purchase on the reservation, but then eventually has it shipped to Lander, not. So is there confusion there? I mean, if it's just because you place the order on your phone while you're on the reservation, but have it shipped off reservation, my understanding was that the exemption would not apply. Am I incorrect in that?
Madam Chair, Representative, thank you for letting me clarify that. No, that's an important distinction. So if you are on the reservation and you make the purchase and have it shipped off of the reservation, then our normal Wyoming sales tax rules apply, where it still would be taxable. It's dependent upon where the customer receives possession of the product. So that's our sourcing. So I'll clarify one more time. You're on the reservation, have it shipped off the reservation, then it's normal sales tax sourcing.
Any other questions for Director Fanning? Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Administrator Fanning, so in the amendment, which I assume this is the amendment that you worked with the LSO on, two things are being stricken from the amendment. Well, there's multiple things being stricken, but admissions or services also being stricken from the amendment. And so I want to be clear that those, I know there are lots of other exemptions, services being one of those areas where we exempt most services, but are we skipping something in those by removing them from the bill draft? Thank you.
Administrator Fanning.
Madam Chair, Senator Barlow, yes, that is a distinction there in conversations that we had with LSO. So in previous conversations with this committee, the main focus really did seem to be on if you're going to have something shipped from large online retailers and have it shipped to the reservation. So that is certainly a distinction there. A lot of admissions and or other services are different based on remote seller statutes. So when you have something shipped, if you're a remote seller in Wyoming, we better clarify that as well. So that means you don't have a physical presence in our state, but you're shipping into at thresholds that require you to license. That's really what a remote seller is. So is there the potential for admission charges or other services to still be taxable? That's a question that this committee, it's really a proposed question to this committee is, do you want there to be other taxable items on the reservation as opposed to just shipping retail products? Admission charges are generally to places of amusement, so like movie theaters. Okay, movie theaters generally don't have a remote seller consequence, right? But again, talking with the amendments versus the original bill here, that's a tough distinction to make. And so other services, okay, generally repair, alterations, or improvements of tangible personal property. So those are really better questions for the committee to answer if they want to exempt those types of items.
Follow up, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So just to be clear, the Internet Tax Freedom Act, if this is going to be applicable to this, or if we're going to apply it uniformly, it should include all, at least to me, and what we're trying to do with this bill with these exemptions is include everything. So what we're doing is taking off a bunch of stuff, but still retaining through the elimination of the admissions and services, still retaining some of the in-person stuff, not remote, but in-person stuff, which could still be could be deemed as inconsistent with that Internet Freedom Tax Act, whatever that is. Anyway, I just want to understand that better. So anything to follow up, great. I'll just keep mulling on it. Thank you.
Director Fanning, did you want to, or Administrator Fanning, anything you want to add?
No, Madam Chair, I think that's
other questions. Okay, other questions, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Administrator Fanning, so you said that this, the intent here or the product here would be that now tribal members would not have the burden of proof on them to prove that they're a tribal member. So that means they wouldn't have to submit the forms that they fill out to the retailers to show that they are tax exempt, that the burden is shifted to the retailers themselves. And so that, I'm assuming, means that these online retailers, Amazon or, Target or whomever, then would need to know that their address is within the boundaries of the reservation to therefore automatically just not charge sales tax? Or how do we know that that connection is going to be made?
Administrator Fanning.
Madam Chair, Representative Penn, the answer is yes. So the burden would fall on the retailer to know if they are shipping it to a jurisdiction or an entity or a person on the actual reservation. So this is not inconsistent with which already happens with big box retailers. So right now you have big box online retailers. If they are shipping it all throughout the state of Wyoming, they've got to know if they've got to charge Fremont County sales tax rate versus Laramie County sales tax rate versus Albany County sales tax rate versus Campbell County sales tax rate. So this is just another distinction for them. And it is a discussion point I have with the next bill. But yes, that burden does shift to these companies rather than having individual members submit documentation.
Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Good morning, Administrator Fanning. Always good to see you. I've got a question along these lines. You said that the Wind River Indian Reservation boundaries isn't defined in the bill, but as it relates to this, would zip codes catch that? I mean, we've got like 82514. There's a Fort Washakie and Arapahoe. As far as delivery, I don't know. I don't know if you know. Trying to get to the just trying to solve it, right? Like what counts as source to the reservation. Anyway, I don't know if you know about that.
Mr. Fanning.
So Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair Oakley, always great to see you as well. I've got to do some more research for you on that one. I really do, because I do know we can use zip codes for sourcing. And I know that's a lot of what Streamline does as far as how their vendors source to us here in Wyoming. But I better punt on this one until I can get you some more research.
Representative Penn?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I might have a little bit of information to weigh in on that. So the zip codes a lot of times are set based on USPS mail routes. And so a lot of people live within reservation boundaries, but have land or zip codes because that's how the post office wants it, so that they can get on the correct mail delivery route. And so I would say maybe zip code alone is probably not sufficient.
Okay. All righty. Committee, just looking at the time and trying to make sure we're not pushing our schedule and or taking away too much time from the next topic. I think what we'll do is we'll have LSO go through 24 LSO 320 version 5. Have Lily go through that. We'll have the department go through that as well. And then we'll open it up to the Wind River Tax Commission to address both bills and then public comment beyond that. So let's have Ms. Sharp run through the second bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The second bill deals only with taxes that are already collected on the reservation. And what I mean by that specifically is when a tribal member makes a purchase on the reservation, but doesn't supply that exemption certificate. So they're getting taxed, but in reality, if they had the certificate, they would not be taxed. Although I do want to make clear, if either of these bills are to pass, it's going to apply to anybody who makes purchases that are sourced to the reservation, irrespective of whether or not they're a tribal member. So this bill provides that the Department of Revenue will collect the taxes just the way they are collecting them right now, but they will hold the taxes in an account, and then they will distribute those taxes back to the tribes. And the way in which they will distribute the taxes back to the tribes will be based on an agreement reached between the state of Wyoming and each tribe. So I'll walk through the bill and show you how it does that. If you go to the title of the bill on page 1, starting with line 1 and into line 2, it provides for the distribution of sales and use taxes. Again, we're talking about use taxes. So and again, Mr. Fanning can explain a lot more. A good example is if you were to buy a car in Lander, and say if you didn't provide the certificate, then you buy it in Lander, you still would, and I'm sorry, say you were to buy a car in California. California, I believe, is not a member of the Streamlined Sales Tax Agreement, I think. And so if you bring it to the reservation where you live, then you should technically still be paying tax on that, even though it wasn't purchased in Wyoming. And that would be a use tax. But again, Mr. Fanning can correct me if I'm wrong. So it will say that sales and use taxes that are collected on the reservation for purchases on the reservation will be distributed back to the tribe. So we'll go to page 2, line 1, 39-15-111 is our statute that provides how sales taxes are distributed. So we'll go down to section B, and then on line 6, it's just saying that except as otherwise provided in the rest of this section of section 111, this is how they'll be distributed. And the entire statutes are actually incredibly complicated, but this one change is pretty simple. So it's going to add another subsection R, and again, it's going to provide, and this language is going to be repeated throughout the bill, just to ensure that no matter how you change the statutes later, we'll know to change it. If you just change this one, the other statutes will also change. So if you go to line 10. First, it starts out with being except as otherwise provided in this subsection. The reason why we have that in there is because we prepared this bill to look like all the other tax collection statutes, and that is that 1% of the collections go to the Department of Revenue to pay for this whole process. So that's why it's except as otherwise provided. And so the exception is that except for the 1% that will go to the Department of Revenue, this is how the taxes will be distributed. Then on line 11, we'll say all revenue collected under this article. This article refers to Article 15. And so that's just all your sales taxes collected under this article. But here on line 12, we are going to say this is just from remote sellers. And Mr. Fanning can explain this far better than I can. But because we're not changing the amount of tax collected, we're not making a distinction between online vendors and in-person vendors. We're just changing the distribution. So we can change this, and that wouldn't be a violation of the Internet of the Internet Tax Freedom Act. So we're saying all revenue collected under this article, basically all sales taxes collected from the department, and that's the Department of Revenue, from remote sellers. And so 3915-501 and 3915-502, those are just remote sellers and what we also call remote facilitators. A good example is Amazon. For sales sourced to the Wind River Indian Reservation shall be distributed to the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes as provided in this section. And then the next line is just going to say, this is the section that says, this is the line that says the Department of Revenue will retain 1% of the revenues to cover the administrative costs. Then on line 18, the remaining amount of the funds that are collected from remote sellers will be paid to each tribe as determined by a separate agreement between each tribe and the state of Wyoming. And then what LSO was, we added one more provision that you all didn't request, but it was what if an agreement isn't reached? So without getting into any substantial analysis, we just said that if an agreement isn't reached, then the Department of Revenue will just still hold those funds in that account. And then if we'll turn on to page 3, on line 2, you have 3915-11. What that is, it just says the exact same language, but this is for the local sales taxes. The section before was for state sales taxes. You go down to line 11 on page 3, 3916-111. That section applies to state use taxes, but it's exact same language. Then we'll go to page 4, line 4. We have 3916-11. That section is providing for local use taxes, and that's pretty much the bill.
For questions for Lily? If not, let's hear from Director or Mr. Fanning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on this bill, the department generally has 2 questions that we would like to ask the committee. So is the intent with this bill to make internet purchases taxable on the reservation? If not, that's kind of my first point of this original question, because right now, if we remember, these purchases are already supposed to be exempt on the reservation if they're being purchased by a tribal member on the reservation. So is this bill draft just to try and distribute the erroneously collected tax? I think that's kind of one of our questions. We're not quite sure on this bill draft. And Madam Chair, if you'd like me to stop with that question before I get to my next, I'd be more than happy to.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. Yes, I think that is what we're trying to get after. Is in theory, a tribal member would submit a certificate and receive the refund or recollect the tax they shouldn't have been taxed. But in reality, we know that that's not happening for every purchase. We're over collecting on these tax, or collecting a tax we're not authorized to collect. So it would be a way of trying to push it back to the tribal governments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so that is certainly very helpful. Our response to that would be, okay, how are we going to know if someone has been overcharged the tax Because that's currently kind of the dilemma we have right now. So are they supposed to come to the department to recoup that money and then we put it into a fund? That's kind of our conversation. And that's kind of our first point here is this dealing with the erroneously collected tax? And then we can have that conversation kind of going forward. So that's my first point. And I have another once you respond.
Okay, Mr. Fanning, I think what we recognize is, ideally we have surgical tools to go in there and decide which household should be taxed and which one shouldn't. But the reality is we don't have that tool without being overly intrusive into every household and every purchase. So we're trying to use a bit of a blunt tool to maybe overcompensate to some degree. As long as that transaction occurred or the sale occurred, was sourced within Wind River, if whatever we collect from that, we're still going to give it back, even if we perhaps that was an authorized collection from a non-Indian purchaser on the reservation.
Madam Chair, okay, got it. Thank you. Very helpful. So on this one as well, so with remote sellers, we do have those categorized in our system. We can do that. In previous meetings, and I think maybe even back in maybe June, we had talked about maybe using electronic shopping NAICS codes for this type of distribution. That may be a better way to try and get at what I now understand to be the intent of your bill, because with remote sellers, you're going to get the large online ones as well. But are you wanting, I'm thinking about how it works in our system. Are you wanting to get any tax that we have folks categorized as a remote seller, as opposed to anything that's being shipped online? Those could be two separate things. And I know we're getting into the weeds there. Maybe we could just move on to my second question.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. I don't know that I have an answer to that. So let's hear the second.
Okay, so the second one is related to these compacts that we've been talking about for a while. Is the original thought here was that the Wind River Reservation, at least for sales tax purposes, would be considered like outside of the reservation. And then there would be an agreement with the tribes to split kind of that revenue. And I was just wondering, this is not the intent of that bill, correct?
I don't know that I'm following you. I think the intent is we collect it. And if the tribes in the state of Wyoming come up with an agreement where they agree on the distribution, 50-50 to each tribal government or 70-30 to each tribal government, with the state retaining its 1% for administrative fee, then those funds would be distributed. But if we, in the absence of that agreement, we would just hold that money until there was a day where an agreement was reached on the distribution.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so I understand that part fully now as well. So just talking about distribution, right? And so we did have, there could be a fiscal IT programming note to kind of make this happen, because what we would need to do is update our forms for these vendors to somehow categorize items that are being shipped onto the reservation. So there is a potential fiscal note there as well. But the way I believe these are kind of two different approaches that you can take. And so the first one, we really do have conversations on if you can separate out taxation around remote sellers versus e-commerce. This one is just the distribution piece, which is something the state of Wyoming has full control of. So we can certainly do that. This LSO 0320 is something we can administratively do with just a little bit of guidance from the committee. LSO 0319 is something that we have concerns if we can administer, let alone the legality of it as well. And with that, the department would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. I'd also offer that I think we looked at the 1%. That's what was looked at in South Dakota. And if there's a higher cost for administration that would require that to maybe be 2%, I think that's where the funding might be to help you administer the program. So we can visit about those particulars down the road too, if that makes sense. Okay, with that, any questions for Director Fanning? We'll just say you're director. You've been elevated today. I just can't quite get to administrator. Sorry, Brenda. Representative Chestick.
Madam Chairman and Administrator Fanning, this relates to my first question. I accept the definition of source to the reservation. If that means delivered to, I'm good with it. That's fine. That works for me. And that's what I would want that to be here on in draft 320 on page 2. If we can, but my question is source to the Wind River Indian Reservation defined anywhere else? If it's not defined anywhere else, I would like to include the definition here that source means delivered to, but if it's defined someplace else, then we're good.
Mr. Fanning.
Madam Chair, Representative Chestick, yes, it is defined. So we have it in 39-15-104. Those are our sourcing statutes, and it basically says if it's delivered. So, yep.
Any other questions, Ms. Penn or Representative Penn?
I'm co-chair. Just one quick confirmation. So this bill 320 does not address the concern that was raised earlier about tribal members being required to submit their tax exemption certificates. They would still have to do that with this bill. Is that right?
Mr. Fanning.
Madam Chair, Representative Penn, great question. The answer is yes. They would still be required to submit the documentation. The way Madam Chair explained it to me is that this is just for the erroneously collected tax. It's going to be held in a fund and then distributed if we have an agreement in place.
Follow up. Maybe a point on that too is, what this contemplates though is, the burden being on the individual purchaser or consumer. They submit the form. They're still entitled to receive that refund on the tax they paid erroneously. But for those that are over collected, we don't really have a great mechanism to find those individual consumers and give them their refund back. It'd be a nightmare to try and figure that out. So the compromise or the thinking behind this is, in lieu of that, we're giving it to the tribe. So the tribe benefits in essence from the state's tax. So it's a little odd, but nonetheless, that's what we've got. Okay, with that, let's hear from the Wind River Tax Commission. And please, I know there's a delegation of you. We've got Councilman Washiki also in the audience. So if you wanted to address the group, please know we welcome your testimony, as well as Vice Chairman Ute, who's also in the audience. Presenters, just to be clear, you're welcome to speak on both bills. Like I said, it wouldn't make sense to advance both bills. I think if the committee decides to take action on either of the bill, it would be on one of them. So we're kind of looking for some guidance and feedback. Certainly an option is we don't move either bill and the status quo remains. So I just want to make sure that we're all clear on that. So please turn on your mics and introduce yourself for the record.
Good morning. My name is Clarence Aragon, and I'm the director of the Wind River Tax Commission.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, Chair Lady. I'm Valerica Whiteman, and I'm a Wind River Tax Commissioner.
Good morning. My name is Travis Shakespeare, and I'm a compliance officer for the Wind River Tax Commission.
So I have one question regarding the first bill. So would this bill exempt all residents on the reservation? Just to follow up with what was stated earlier, if someone was to purchase something on the reservation and then it's delivered off the reservation, that would be taxable. What about for non-tribal members who reside on the reservation and they purchase and then it's delivered on the reservation? Would they be exempt?
I'll tackle this. Generally we're the ones that ask questions and then you respond. But I think the testimony we heard was this would be a reservation-wide exemption. So it would include non-tribal members or non-Indians. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just to be clear, with the amendments, it would be both remote and in-person purchases with the amendments. And I want to be clear that Mr. Fanning nods his head or so with the amendment, and I say that's not maybe in the bill, but with the amendment, it would be all purchases, no matter who made them, remote and in person. I just confirm that. Thank you, Madam
Thank
Chair.
you, Senator Barlow. Yes. So please proceed with your testimony.
So my staff and I have done our research regarding a sales tax agreement with the state of Wyoming. And from my understanding is that the state of Wyoming gives back to the counties and towns based off population. And through my research, I see that Fremont County has a population of 39,472 citizens. Riverton has 10,587, Shoshone 491, Pavilion 226, Lander 7,550, Hudson 439, DuBois 919. Now, out of that population, that leaves 19,260 accounted for. And it's led me to believe that that population is what resides on the reservation. Following that, there has been over 25 million that has been dispersed back to these towns. Riverton being the highest with over 13 million. Now, if we're going off population, the reservation would receive a higher amount than Riverton based off population. And to continue that, like I said, the population of 19,260, that would approximately bring a little over $18 million back to the reservation off the sales tax.
Do you have more to offer? Information? Mr. Aragon, I appreciate the statistics and information about population per the county versus, the city of Riverton and Lander, the larger populations. I don't know that the calculation is that neat. Certainly there are a lot of big box stores in Riverton and in Lander that don't exist on the reservation. And so I think some of these taxes, it really depends on a little bit more analysis than just the straight population. Have you asked Department of Revenue or Fremont County to help you come up with a number of what distribution amount back to the reservation? And I use that term broadly, knowing they're two separate sovereigns. Have you reached out to them to see if they have any further analysis that could help?
Senator Ellis, I have been in talks with Brett Fanning of the Department of Revenue, and we kind of kicked around what a hypothetical MOU or a compact would look like. And from my understanding is that if an agreement was in place, everything on a reservation would be taxed. And we have 3 of the biggest casinos in the state of Wyoming. So I think that would generate a lot of revenue. Not only would it give money back to the state, but it also would give money back to the reservation as well in a form of a sales tax.
Additional comments from the commission? So I have a question. I stayed at the big casino, and I had dinner at one of the restaurants and was charged 6% sales tax. And then I bought something at the gift shop and wasn't charged anything. And so of course I asked my waitress, do you charge this tax to everyone? And she said yes. And then I saw Chairman Sinclair in the casino as well. And so I asked him about it, and he said that Arapahoe might charge their own specific tax at the casino. And so that's where I'm some of this is a little muddled of who gets to keep what and what tax imposition exists out there. I think that, what we've heard consistently from the Department of Revenue is even for in-person purchases, vendors will collect that money and remit some of it back to the state of Wyoming, but they have little enforcement tools. They don't feel comfortable coming onto the reservation and auditing those business. So I see a lot of inconsistencies out there, and I'm just looking for a level playing field. If either we're going to be really fair and get after it, or we're going to back away equally and stay out of it. So I guess the question I have is, can you confirm that Arapahoe has its own tax at its own casino? And I'm guessing that revenue goes only to the Arapahoe government. And then second, do you have a preference when you look at these two bills? They're two different concepts, a preference of which bill we should maybe consider going with today, or at some point in the future if we decide to not take action on either bill today.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Like you mentioned, that there are taxes on Arapahoe property, and the way that works is the casino sits on sole land that's owned solely by the Arapahoe tribe, and it's the case for the Shoshone Rose Casino as well. So each tribe has their own right to act on if they want to enforce their own taxes within their land and their enterprise. And for us, it's really difficult because we're a joint tribe, meaning we're a representation of both the Arapahoe and the Shoshone tribe. And it's making our job a little difficult because we know that these taxes exist out there. And what we're trying to do is to get revenue bringing in back. So I see why you're a little confused with how the tribes are collecting their own taxes when that tax money should be given back to the reservation as a whole. And to answer your question regarding the bills, I don't know if I have the authority to, but just from the Wind River Tax Commission, we would like to put a pause on both bills so we can continue to do our research. We've notified the business councils on what revenue lies out there if we're to proceed with this avenue for a sales tax. But now we have our homework to inform our tribal members about this sales tax as well.
It's from our commissioners. Questions for the tax commission. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I don't know if this is a question for you or not. Maybe you can answer this, but do you know if is Walmart on the reservation or off?
Mr. Aragon.
Thank you, Representative Penn. I do know the answer to that, but I choose not to say it on record right now.
Maybe a different way of asking it is, I'm guessing Walmart collects tax regardless and submits it to the state of Wyoming from all customers.
Yes, that's correct.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you for your testimony today. We appreciate it. And if you don't mind staying a little bit longer in case some additional questions arise, that would be great.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, on our agenda, we have public comment. Anyone who would like to testify. I know we've got elected leaders in the room. If they would like to speak on this, we'll start there. Ready. Welcome. And please introduce yourself for the record.
Northern Arapahoe Business Council.
Attorney for the Northern Arapahoe Business Council.
The two bills here that are drafted before us here today, I think. Yes, it is. I'll get closer. The two bills here drafted here today are good bills, and especially the internet tax. I think the language on them, we just have to clean it up and iron it all out. And I think we can move forward on it, but not at this time here, And I think there's more conversation that needs to be done with our tax commission and our intertribal council to figure out all these the language on these bills, and we could figure it out and move forward. And I support them, but I think the language on them has to be more refined and more definite, so that way it's just a more streamlined process for our membership. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Then we'll ask questions.
Okay, and I just wanted to clarify some stuff that was talked about earlier. So the Northern Arapaho tribe owns several parcels of property separate. They are under the sole jurisdiction of the Northern Arapaho tribe. The Northern Arapaho tribe has its own tribal code in which for years they've had, for an example, a lodging tax at the hotel. That revenue, because it's sourced from Northern Arapaho only land under the law, only goes back to the Northern Arapaho tribe.
Well, or a question from my co-chair.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you, Ms. Johnson, because I was interested in that. In fact, I mean, I'm not just my opinion, but I was pleased. I mean, I'm pleased about that because I was wondering, like with the casinos, like if we were, you know, with this, all of these tax issues, whether there was a seriously missed opportunity for the tribes, really. So if you're collecting that tax, that's great, because obviously it's a significant source, I would imagine. And so the casinos and the casinos are collecting tax, and that's 100% going back to the tribes, and that already exists.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much. Anybody else want to testify in this bill? We have Ms. Soldier Wolf. Come on up.
Hello, dos Yufna Soldier Wolf. One of the things I want to talk about as a tribal member is basically wanting to support what Clarence Aragon had said from the Tax Commission and what my councilman had just now said, as far as supporting them and saying that we're not there as far as the language, but also a question to, I don't know where he went, but Mr. Fanning. This question is for him and the Tax Commission. As far as sales tax goes, there's been a bill that has been passed this year for cash apps like Venmo, PayPal, and a lot of that language. When people buy on the reservation or sell on the reservation, I don't see any language pertaining to that inside any of these bills. And as far as that goes, you know, I think you said it, Representative Oakley, as far as going forward and putting that type of language, I don't think we're there yet. And I think there's a lot of homework that needs to be done to include not having to come back and do another cash app bill in the future. So, you know, what does that look like? And what does that look like going forward? I'm sorry to throw a wrench in all of that, but that's just the question I had or comment I wanted to say. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Soldier Wolf? Okay, seeing none. Is there anybody else that would like to testify on this bill? Welcome, Vice Chairman Ute.
Morning, co-chairs and the rest of the committee. So I think personally, I can't speak for the rest of the Shoshone Business Council, but I think that first bill, it's a little too convoluted. I think they're, you know, with what Director Fanning, now Director Fanning has said, it's pretty, there's a lot of questions to it. You exempt everybody within, there's no proof of if you're an enrolled member or not. That might pose a problem for the county, especially if somebody misrepresents themselves and gets a post office box out here, or they get items delivered out here. They also make the order out here and then they get it delivered here. Now the county or whoever is missing out on tax money. So there might be some pushback there. For us, I think for the tribes, that first bill, it wouldn't matter because you know what, that money is coming back to the tribes anyway, whether they're enrolled or not. There's a lot of questions there. So I don't think that first bill is I personally, I don't think it's the right direction to go. It's just, it's too complex. The second bill, I think it's the right direction because that the taxes are already being paid at today. So if somebody's making a purchase today that didn't do the SST form, they're paying a tax, the state's collecting it. What do you do with it? So there has to be some kind of mechanism for that money to come back into the tribes. I think the only question that I had on that was if the just so I'm clear, the tribal members still have an option to fill out an SST form. Is that correct? And then, so since this bill does now say sales and use tax in LSO's scenario where you buy a car, like let's say I buy a car that does accept the SST form, and I use that form and I make the purchase from my home here, and I go and pick that car up, or whether it's delivered or not. I know there's a Wyoming statute that says goods delivered here are tax exempt, but does this form then override that? And then so then when I bring it home and I go get my plates, which is where your tax is being paid there, does that then exempt you if you fill out this form? Where it doesn't before, because you go to get your tags and then they say you're paying the tax on it.
Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Just trying to be clear or understand, so I'm going to ask you a question. So you're saying that are you currently, as a tribal member, like if you bought a car, are you paying the tax?
If you buy it outside of Wyoming, yes. That's the sales and use. So the way they get around it is that's the use tax, I think. So I know it says sales and use tax in these new bills. That was kind of a question that I always wondered, was how does that affect that? And I hate to be the devil's advocate, but how does the county feel about that? Because you would see then the second bill also doesn't address tribal membership or not. So then what happens to non-enrolled members who live out here that take advantage of that, or like I said, get post office box out here or address out here, and then they start buying vehicles out here, delivered out here, or they go and pick them up. I would think the county would have something to say about that. That's kind of a I wouldn't say a sticking point, but it is a point there. I do feel like that's the direction to go, because like I said before, that's the money's already being paid and it has to come back into the tribe somehow. And then the tribes just figure that out. But the main point I wanted to find out was if you still have the option to use that SST form, if you should choose to or not, because myself on large purchases, I would rather save $1,000 in tax and have it go somewhere where I don't know it's going to be used. But that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Like I said, we don't normally ask the questions, but I think Ms. Sharp can provide some more information.
Madam Chair, and Brett Fanning Administrator Fanning is still on, so he can correct me if I'm wrong, but absolutely, you can still use your certificate for those sales. And this would only apply, say, for example, you bought a car from Carvana, and then it's delivered here, and you didn't use that certificate, then this is where the sales tax is, we use the word erroneous. It's not really erroneous. It's just because without using your certificate, you get taxed. But no, it doesn't stop that at all. It's just really for that what we're calling that erroneous tax. But Mr. Fanning can correct me if I'm wrong.
I was going to say, I don't see him raising his hand to correct you. I think you're fine. All righty. Any other comments? I guess I have a question. We have a tribal chairman and then the governor's office would like to weigh in. That's the order I saw him in. I guess my question is this, a few years ago, the legislature, made some changes to its lodging tax. And all I can say is, I think if we had affirmatively said that the Shoshone Rose or the big casino had to charge that lodging tax to your customers and then remit that tax back to the state of Wyoming and the local counties, I think there'd be uproar over that. And rightfully, because that exceeds our jurisdiction. And so I just wanted to say, every year that we don't fix this is a year where that's happening to your tribal members and paying a state sales tax that benefits Wyoming and Fremont County. So, Councilman Ute, I appreciate your comments. And if you would like to respond, I want to hear from you.
So I guess the question would be, would the tribal government itself be able to fill out a SST form?
Mr. Ute, I think if the tribe were purchasing an item online that was being taxed, yes, but not on behalf of individual members. Okay, so we'll hear from Mr. Washiki and then from the governor's office. And Kid, if you want to get on board, get teed up, we'll be here. We'll hear from you. Welcome.
Yeah, I think that tax is a very difficult issue. And in some cases, as we appear here, we may not be totally prepared to address this issue at this time. I myself feel that we should take the avenue of perhaps taking more time to work out a solution through some type of compact or some type of MOU with the state of Wyoming on taxes myself. I know that the Arapaho tribe has applied a tax. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. The Shoshone tribe at this time has not applied a tax other than the one at the hotel that is basically used for maintenance and whatever things that go on there that needs attention. But I myself feel that we should perhaps hold both these bills and have a further discussion down the road on it. I think that the newly created tax commission has a very difficult problem because we have two tribes here. And it's not only in this area that it's caused some confusion, but it also causes some confusion when it comes to some of the federal legislation that pertains to the Wind River Reservation. So, and even as far as the appropriations for Wind River, I think those are some difficult issues, and we've for years have struggled with that. I just think we need a little more time. That's where I'm at with it.
Questions for Councilman Washakie? I have one. Under the first one, which would just exempt the state collecting it, one conversation I've had with my colleagues, we were on the bus for a while yesterday, though, was what would prevent the tribes from coming together on businesses that are in joint tribal lands to impose their own tax, and they collect it from tribal members and non-tribal members. As you know, I'm a member of the Navajo Nation, and when I travel to my reservation, I see where they impose all kinds of taxes, and all that money is collected by the tribe and kept by the tribe. And so I'm wondering, I mean, there's some benefit to the first one where it's maybe unclear, but then the state of Wyoming would just take itself out of all of that entirely and would leave it to Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho to come up with those agreements on their own, impose their taxes as they wish, allow Northern Arapaho to tax how they please on their lands and Eastern Shoshone on theirs. And so I'm wondering, have you just as you've been thinking about a path forward, I just kind of wanted to throw that option out there with that first mechanism. That one just takes Wyoming out of it altogether. And then you could still collect taxes from non-tribal members through a tribal tax. So do you have any thoughts, or have you given that any consideration?
I haven't given any consideration to that, and I would be premature to make to give an answer. I think that we need more time. Okay. We're just like you. We're elected. We may hold a seat for 4 years, but you know, it's not permanent. And any council coming behind us could change that. And so we have to make some good decisions. It's lasting decisions. And in the area of taxes, I'm just not ready to do that.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And certainly, I think we're all hearing the message pretty loud and clear. So, and we'll hear from Mr. Wentland from the governor's office.
Chairman Ellis, Co-Chair Oakley, members of the committee. I'll be short and sweet. I know there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of good discussion from folks who this impacts more directly than it does me. And to that point, I think just from the governor's office standpoint, there is a lot involved in this bill. Legally, policy standpoint, I think there's good intentions, but I do think we need more time, and we really would just want to listen to the council's perspectives on this. If the councils at some point come to the state for negotiating a compact, it would likely be the governor's office who would lead that. we only want to enter into those discussions if there's a consensus that the councils do, so that we don't overstep inadvertently. So just listening to what we've heard today, kind of coming in, knowing the tenor around this discussion, wanted to voice that for the committee, and I would stand for any questions. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Wentland? Senator Barlow? None? Seeing none, thank you. Would anyone else like to testify on either of these bills? Okay, seeing that, I think I know what I'm going to hear right now, but hopefully some crickets. But Senator Barlow, were you wanting to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I've moved to table the tax bills at least until the next interim. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Another solution would be to not move a bill or not make a motion, and it just doesn't advance. It doesn't really matter, but the motion is to table the bill. Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you. Discussion question on that I should know probably, but procedurally, the difference if we table them, does that kind of hold a place for it to be an interim topic for next versus just letting them die? What's the procedural difference depending on how we handle this?
Senator Barlow, did you want to tackle that?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So my motion was to table them until the next interim. So that, and what this committee gets assigned to by Management Council is completely a Management Council. It's just, we will not have any further discussion of these bills before the session, until between now and the end of the session. That would be the intent of the motion.
It's been seconded. I would just offer, I think, all those in favor of tabling the bills, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion passes. Senator Barlow.
So Madam Chairman, I do think, and I do appreciate those folks that testified today, the tribal members, the commission members, the taxation commission. I do think that as you develop suggestions and ideas, maybe reaching out to the two co-chairmen and starting a discussion about what your interests are, so we can exchange a qualitative information, and then we can start talking about how we draft legislation that reflects your priorities. So I don't know if that's maybe I'm volunteering our two co-chairs, but if the co-chairs wanted to appoint, or not appoint, but ask us for volunteers, I would certainly be willing to at least help in that process of what do we need to do to help advance this discussion so we can come to a meaningful policy resolution in some level, in some time frame. So thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. With the motion, I think the motion to table is a non-debatable one, so I voted on it. I think that my preference sometimes is to just not have a motion. I think for someone who works on it, voting on it just is a little bit of salt in the wound. So sometimes it's nice for a bill just to not advance with no motion. And that's just an old thing I remember from years ago of how the committees used to operate. So sometimes just no motion is the same as tabling a motion, and sometimes a little bit easier on the person who brought the bills. The reason I want to keep this alive, though, is I find it a horrible affront to tribal sovereignty for the state to be collecting this tax and keeping it. And so just every year that we wait, this has been something I've been working on for 2.5 years now. And so I would really, my door's always open, my phone line's open, my email. Let's please keep working on this, because and that's why I keep bringing it, as I don't feel right about what we're doing as a state. We're intruding on your sovereignty and the sovereignty of your tribal members. So more to come in the future, maybe not, we'll see. So with that, we're on to our next topic, and we're a little behind schedule, but I think we're going to be okay. We have tuition in higher ed, college tuition. And so we've asked the University of Wyoming to provide us some information. And just to give just a summary of kind of where we've been, we're looking at the numbers of tribal members that are attending the University of Wyoming, CWC, trying to figure out better paths for higher education, higher attainment of those degrees. And one of the topics that has come up is just the cost of attending college. We've heard some discussion that there are universities out there that are tuition free for Native students. And I think that's a little misleading of a characterization. I think it's cost free for the student, but somebody else bears that cost. And so just trying to figure out how that's been achieved in other states. Along those lines, we got some information about the endowment scholarships that each tribe has, whether or not those are being utilized or underutilized. And so that was kind of just a summary of why this is on our agenda. So with that, we have Mike Smith from the University of Wyoming to to give us some information. Thank you, Mike, for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if it's okay with the co-chairs, I would invite Vice President Kim Chestnut up to represent the university in this testimony, along with President Brad Tyndall from CWC for their perspectives. And I'll be right here in the front row if there's a question or something to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, do we need more chairs is the only question. Do we?
We'll be fine with the 3, I think.
You might not have a table, but you're certainly welcome to pull more chairs up if you want.
Turn on the mic and identify yourself for the record. However, I'm guessing you 3 have worked this out a little bit.
Chair Ellis, I am Brad Tyndall, President of Central Wyoming College.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Kim Chestnut, Vice President from Student Affairs from the University of Wyoming.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Renette Curry from the University of Wyoming, Director of the Native American Education Research and Cultural Center.
First, just a little bit. I think I was called in at the kind of the last hour on this, so I'm going to kind of follow the lead of my good friends at the University of Wyoming, but I have a lot of information to present, and I'm a lot of ears, and I want to be responsive to your questions. And rather than rattling off a whole lot of things, which I'm prone to do, I will respond to questions and try to provide useful information. Thank you.
Great. So, Madam Chair and committee, in regards to the questions asked, the status of the University of Wyoming has been about really wanting to attend to the comprehensive support of our Native students. Certainly, the commentary a little bit more nationally has very much been about tuition costs and cost to attend. And so, in service of that element, that was a focal point in our September board meeting, but that was preceded by our July meeting that we had, our Board of Trustees in Lander, where we had some representatives from both of the tribes come and share with the board a little bit about needs for students and their ability to be successful at University of Wyoming. And so when we're looking at this, we're really wanting to be really conscientious about the needs that exist outside of the cost to attend, while also managing that element. So we did the type of research that we would anticipate a family might do, where they would go online and look at different states and different institutions and assess what's been made available for students either in the state or nationally if they are of Native descent. And what we know is that it's a really unclear and mixed approach, that some institutions are managing that independently, but not many, that some states are supporting unique institutions within their state, and that on rare occasions, there is a state as a whole that might support tuition free, but it's not exclusive to Native students. So New Mexico is that example. All students within the state, no matter of their race or ethnicity, have the ability to attend tuition free. So that applies to this population, but it's not exclusive for them. So when we're really talking about what we're doing at University of Wyoming, it's wanting to continue to explore and advance the resources provided to those students, but it's not exclusive to the cost. And so this actually, yesterday, our board is currently meeting as well. And we provided a presentation on the other strategies we have about advancing the success of our Native students in particular. And it was actually just earlier this month that a team from UW came up and visited with Brad and his cabinet and began to further explore, how do we do this better together? How do we advance our partnerships and our collaborations so that they start well here and maybe more start well there, right? That we don't necessarily have to have them begin at UW. They're welcome to, but we could maybe pour into them having a smoother start and then transitioning down to UW. And then, of course, Renette and her team and many of our colleagues on campus do the academic support, the research and kind of internship opportunities, and then the programmatic piece from really before day one, when they come and visit campus on multiple occasions, and then once they're enrolled and starting with us. And so maybe I will leave it at that. We also have more specifics if that would be helpful, but I am welcoming input from Brad, and then if there are questions, and we could answer further as needed. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair. So I think what people don't like to hear is how complicated things are. So I have complicated input, and then I simplify it down to like, what does this really look like? And so the conversations that we had most recently with UW's core group looking at support for American Indians or Native American students, as Kim said, was a couple of weeks ago. And we've had conversations at the commission in terms of what should there be a special tuition rate? And there's been a lot of discussions, and we had our tuition policy approved through the commission, I believe, in October. We presented that information also to the Joint Education Interim Committee. So there's been discussions with this. And a lot of that discussion has been in terms of like JEIC has been like, let's get this Wyoming Tomorrow thing off first and see what impact that makes. And so you start to see that, oh, that's right. If we establish a kind of a free tuition for American Indian students, how many of them are already covered by Wyoming's Tomorrow or Wyoming's Work? And you start getting down into the complexity of this. And so we as a college, we have spoken with both tribes, and there have been different ideas. The Northern Arapaho tribe, when we spoke to a couple of months ago, sometime this summer, was saying, hey, maybe we should do an endowment like we have with UW. And they shared a copy of what they do. And it's basically a matching fund type of endowment. And I said, okay, that looks good, but let's not just say yes to money. We really need to study this, because when we talk to our advisory group, and our advisory group for Native American Studies is going to meet with UW's, we agreed upon that. So we're on the same conversation. The conversation we've had has so much been, as Kim said, is student support. Is it really the dollars we need, or do we need extra support services or transportation? And that becomes very, very huge. I mean, there's so much devil in the details, if you will, about supporting Native American students. What we have found ever since we became a Native American serving institution officially, where we have staffed up, is kind of these uncle services where the auntie and uncle is there to provide and to help support has been really, really critical. And the other big piece has been math readiness. You're thinking, okay, can we just talk scholarships? I said, well, it gets a complicated space. What we found, for example, in terms of when you change student support, it can have a big impact. We're not talking scholarships. So we've embedded this last year now, tutors in classes. And so we have a tutoring service, but people don't want to go there. So if you embed them in classes, our success rates for math, which is the biggest barrier for Native Americans, if you look at the K-12 data, right, has increased up to 20%. And that's mind-blowing. In higher ed, we don't get 20% improvement numbers in student success rates. It's freaky good. And so the student support piece becomes important. So it's kind of a complicated space. So this is me getting complicated. And I would probably, ask in talking with Provost Kevin Carmen, is there some things we definitely agree on? And one of the things that, and it hasn't gone to our boards, but it's like two guys talking in front with our friends, with Kim and others, has been that free tuition might make sense, but let's drill down into that and see what that would cost. Neither institution, us or UW, think that we could just pull out $1 million and just pay for it. So it'd be something we would go to the state for. And I have some estimates for you. Some estimates. You're saying like, what dollars are we talking about? So one was like, if we're going to provide stuff for free, we should cost it out and the state pay, because neither UW nor CWC can pay for it. We just don't have the money, the budget, like find $500,000 kind of a thing. The other thing we discussed was, what about in-state tuition for Native Americans in surrounding states or any tribe that has an affiliation with this state? And is what Kim has kind of hinted at, is that states do different things, but oftentimes, frankly, it's kind of just for show. So there's a lot of states that will say we'll provide in-state tuition or free tuition, but that's after the federal government actually pays for everything. It's called the last dollar. I'll call it the last dollar cheat. Is we'll say, yeah, we'll pay for it after Pell pays for it and the other tuition pays for it and other, Native American College Fund pays for it. And then you come back at the end and say, oh, it's already paid for it. We gave it to you free. When that's cheating. because the total barrier for our American Indian students is that cost of life. And what we would like to do, I would say safely from both institutions, is have the money to pay for things up front. So those other pots of money can pay for transportation, getting back to the reservation when there's a funeral, and taking care of the broken car and the flat tire, and auntie being sick and grandma needing help. And that's the reality. So in an ideal world, we would like funds that would pay what's the first dollar. We would just pay for the cost, and any other scholarship that they get, even a Pell, could go for cost of living. And that's just being brutally realistic. And so, so I did some back of the envelope calculations. My colleagues probably want to wring my neck because I don't do that because it's too complicated. But just for the sake of this committee, if you were to say, what would it cost, roughly speaking, if the state wanted to pay for the tuition, and I have tuition and fees, and these are really rough numbers. Okay. And so what I did is I went to UW's website and I looked at the number of fall enrollments, and it said 69. And these numbers are really, have a big question mark over them, because someone can identify as enrolled Eastern Shoshone or Northern Arapaho, or sometimes they can say, I don't want to say what my tribal affiliation is. And maybe they're not really having a very strong tribal, because the blood quantum issues are very complicated as being 1/8. Depends on the tribe's definition of blood quantum. So when we get a number of self-reported at UW's website, 69 self-reported Native Americans, you say, is that a good number? It's self-reported. Are they truly enrolled? Where are they from? So my rough estimates are based on knowledge of my college and kind of how that works, because we have a kind of a rough sense of when we get a number that basically is. But if I take, so this is very rough and crude. So you just get a sense of scope, because you're saying, well, how many $1 million? Just tell me how many $1 million. So this is just to give you a sense of this. And so if I take, 69 UW students, and that maybe should be 150, just like 69 self-reported number. CWC self-reported number is 266. By looking at the other colleges, I think it's 197. So I get this total of 532 students. So that's 532 students we're talking about, right? And then I say, well, you would say, what if we just went to the websites and said, what are their tuition reported by the colleges? UW shows to be $5,190 a year. And that's without fees, and fees are heavy. I'm going to add fees in here in a second. And for the community colleges, it's $3,150. So it's really like $5,100, $3,100. Okay, so you start multiplying these out, 69 students at UW for $5,990, and you take the community college students and multiply it, and we come up with what number? 1.8 million. Like $2 million, but that's not without fees, right? So then I was looking at all the colleges' fees and going, oh boy, this is a mess. It's so complicated. It depends on what your major is, and there's different types of fees. But I said, okay, roughly, this is so rough and crude. You basically have to increase our numbers by 50%, roughly, right? So even though at Central Wyoming College, our tuition is $105, we really charge like $165. So you throw in an extra 50%. Okay, so we're now up to what's the total cost to pay for these 532 students? Tuition and fees is about 2.7 million. You say, oh, that's the cost per year. And that's if we gave them the money. And so that if they had Pell, it helps fix their car. They get some other scholarship, it helps take care of business and gas or whatever. This is if we just said first dollar in, very rough and crude, 2.7 million, call it 3 million. Okay, so then you say, how big of an endowment would you need for, a $2.7 million a year? And it just miraculously at 4.5% equals exactly $60 million endowment. So this is kind of you're saying, oh, if we really want to do a first dollar, pay for things so that the other scholarships can cover life expenses, what's the size of an endowment? So rough and crude. It's kind of the size of the Wyoming's Tomorrow, which is 50 million. This will be another 60 million. So the conversations we've had at the commission in times past was, can we just get the Wyoming's Tomorrow in first? Because that's kind of, I hear you, but I got important American Indian students that need to be served. But that gives you just kind of a very rough and crude. And these numbers could be off by 30% or Lord knows what. and hopefully no one from UW is gonna wring my neck, but I just figured you'd like to kind of know, like, can someone just give us a rough number? And that number would be a $60 million endowment if we wanted to have $2.7 million a year for tuition and fees for our students, whether at UW or at the community colleges. And so, but if you want to be, so that was the simple answer. If I wanted to pivot back towards complicated, I would say, have you tried to subtract out Hathaway? Because how many of those students qualify for a Hathaway? And maybe we don't want to have Hathaway given to them on top of this endowments. If you want to subtract that out and say, what about Wyoming Works? I don't feel comfortable. Let's say the state doesn't feel comfortable. And then you start trying to subtract that out. Back of the envelope, this is Willie Nosek, our vice president, thinks that you could back at about 46% of that. And so basically half. So it's possible, maybe if we say we don't feel comfortable, adding up different types of scholarships, so it may be a $30 million endowment, but we need to talk and figure this out, because we could come in saying, well, just give it 60 million. And we come back later going, well, that was wrong. Or maybe, the state doesn't feel comfortable about awarding a student a Wyoming's Work and a Hathaway or something else, or the Wyoming's Tomorrow Kickstart and this, just choose one kind of a thing. Because we're trying to watch our pennies. So I hope that provides kind of a scope, kind of the big pictures. If we just say, okay, give us the money to pay for it, $60 million endowment, let's go. But it really warrants a lot more further study to get a much better number if it was the will you all to pursue that.
For Mr. Tyndall, Madam Co-Chair.
And Co-Chair, thank you. Dr. Tyndall, always appreciate your wisdom. So I'm really interested in this first dollar in thing. So if, let's say we did this perfect world, we do this endowment. When you do this, the first dollar in, if you will, does that end up disqualifying all those other things, thereby canceling out what you're doing, which is because exactly what you're talking about. Do Pell Grants go away and then Hathaway go away, in which case we come up with a lot of money, and in the end, you're just replacing dollars that they would have qualified for in a different manner.
If you want a good answer, we'll have Ms. Chestnut.
President Tyndall, sorry.
Chair Ellis and Representative Oakley. Yes, it does disqualify some. And I think Ms. Chetnik could give a very, very good answer to this. In general, I don't think it qualifies much for Pell. I think Pell can come in and pretty much never gets canceled. That's good. But the other scholarships, and we have about 6 internally in our foundation, they all depend. And a lot of people want to do kind of the last dollar thing. And so it would cancel some of the private scholarships. And I haven't really included that much into the analysis, except Willie's kind of guess information back of the envelope. And in terms of the Hathaway, if someone, I'm trying to think of the rules of the Hathaway. I don't know if we were to create an endowment and give somebody a scholarship, I don't know in the rules of the disbursement of the Hathaway if that would be negated or not. We'd have to look at this probably. So we don't know, because scholarships have all sorts of rules and they're all different.
Yeah. So Mr. Tyndall and University of Wyoming, I guess we're further on in this conversation than I thought we were going to be today. So, when I visited with Mr. Smith, and I think anyone can tell you read the newspaper and it talks about the University of Arizona announced free tuition for students who are enrolled with a federally recognized tribe in Arizona. Oregon State, they'll do tuition for federally recognized Native students, regardless of where they live. I just see these articles. So I wasn't wanting to skip the step and say, how does the state of Wyoming and the legislature create an endowment? That's my first step was, how did they do it? Were these university-driven efforts? Did their board of trustees set up an endowment? Did a private entity say at the University of Arizona, here's what I want? So how that worked with them, I think was what I was hoping to kind of get an understanding of a little bit first. So I don't know if any of you have any in the research of how other states have done it and tackled it.
Yeah, great. So, Madam Chair, what I could offer is, yes, that research has been done, and you could do it in a couple of different ways, right? So there are some national resources that have gone through all states and said, here's the status that can be concluded based on the review of that entity. And so we used some of that research too. What we have acknowledged at UW is that isn't the greatest in-depth assessment of what each state is doing and what each institution is doing. And really the general sense is that most of the time, this is an institution managed element that rarely does the whole state attend to the matter full sail across all schools of higher ed. And so when we looked a little farther at some of our peer states that we would consider more competitive, it's a fairly veiled conclusion for institutions, right? They see other schools as competitors. That's fair. They manage their money somewhat independently. So what you can conclude from research online is one thing, and the actual first dollar in or last dollar in equation is quite variable based on independent schools. And so we can share with you what we have. It wouldn't be the best, most comprehensive and in-depth assessment of the matter, which could be a conclusion that is decided would be really helpful, but there is not much continuity across the nation about how that's managed. And to the point that Brad made earlier, there's a fair amount of a selling feature in it that you can claim that you make that offer available to students of varying either in-state or out-of-state, but that the reality of the financial impact and award given to the student might be fairly minimal under the arrangement that the institution coordinates. And so, Mike, I would offer that you could add more.
Yes, Madam Chair, if I may. I guess first to reiterate Kim's point, this was not an in-depth study done by our economic analysis folks in the College of Business, or where we were diving into this like LSO or NCSL might be able to do, like state by state. But I also want to, be transparent about what we discovered when we went online. And I'm going to give you've probably stumbled on this already in your research, but there was one article that claimed to have done a state-by-state survey. And so if somebody's looking at it, excuse me, that was at www.collegeconfidential.com. It's not completely accurate. I found an error or two in my own just poking on a link and going to a school's website, but it gets you a head start. So again, I guess the disclaimer, take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt, right? This wasn't this in-depth study, but a couple things of interest. In Colorado, they're the only school that provides a tuition waiver that I could tell was Fort Lewis College, and that is mandated by by state statute. That institution is in a unique situation of having been a boarding school in its past. And so, leave it to you to wonder if that was why the Colorado legislature decided to bring that school out. The state of Michigan has a legislated tuition waiver. I think, again, we looked at a few kind of comparator states, not nationwide, but of the states we looked at, though that kind of legislative thing is not the norm. Kim mentioned the New Mexico approach, which is interesting. Universities in Utah, University of Utah and Utah State, maybe more. Those two do provide a waiver. The state schools in Montana. You mentioned the University of Arizona also. Excuse me, Northern Arizona University. But I would also note that the vast majority of these, maybe all the ones I pulled up and looked at, are Brad's cheater last dollar in. So get all your aid, get all your scholarships, get everything. And if there's any tuition or tuition and fees left, we'll cover the remaining. So that's just kind of what I found on that initial kind of look on the internet for data on this kind of thing.
Jared, could I offer a compliment to that? I would say the additional piece, and when it's a last dollar in contribution, that doesn't mean that that couldn't be significant and beneficial to the student. It certainly can. But maybe to reiterate Brad's point earlier, it is the additional costs and the additional responsibilities that these students have, all students, of course, but we see it uniquely for our Native students, that complicate the ability to be then successful as a student. And so when we are covering nearly the remaining dollars, which sometimes are awarded through our foundation and our scholarships, we're not making a significant dent in the reality about what in some ways challenges their ability to be ongoing students, right? That if we're really talking about the comprehensive nature of the student experience, it's so much more than a tuition and fee waiver. It really does have to take into account the elements that make possible attending college. And so that's really what we're invested in pursuing. Thank you.
Questions from committee members? I have one. So with the Northern Arapaho Endowment and the Chief Washakie Endowment, are those funds eligible to be used for all the transportation costs and the other costs that are burdensome to students when they attend college?
Our Madam Chair, the students awarded those funds at UW, if they are in above the cost to attend, they could be used additionally as they see fit. But if it is needed to cover the cost, then it doesn't make itself available to be used otherwise.
Any other questions from our committee? I will just say, I don't know that I'm so offended by the last dollar. The cheater schools, I'm like, it seems like a good idea to require the feds to, if they're eligible for that funding, they're eligible for that funding, and if they should use it, they should use it. So I don't know where that came to be such a bad thing, but go ahead if you want to respond.
Madam Chair, we wouldn't disagree. We welcome all of the contributions. Brad's point was specifically to say, we still want those students to receive the Pell funds. We still want them to have those dollars to cover the transportation to and fro, to cover the childcare, to cover the unforeseen expenses. And so you bet we're also invested in receiving those funds, but in the fashion in which they're made available makes it different about how the student can spend the funds.
Just to be clear, so I think what I hear sometimes out in the world is I have people that come up to me and say, free tuition at Arizona, free tuition here for Native students. What's Wyoming doing? It would be nice to be able to say, well, there's nothing that prohibits the University of Wyoming if it wanted, the Board of Trustees or some other private donor wanted to set up its own endowment. So that's what I'm trying to get after, is like the mechanism of how that works. You know, certainly if a private donor wants to set up this endowment and make it work, that's awesome. But I think in Wyoming, it's the tendency is always to look to the legislature to pay for everything and set up everything. And I just want to be clear, that was not my intent for bringing you in today, was to try and set up another endowment. I've been on the education committee for a lot of years, worked on Hathaway, worked on Wyoming's Tomorrow. Like, I think we provide a lot. I just think we're just trying to get information for people. And then certainly if there were updates about private university programs or endowments that people are going on, that would be helpful updates too. So, but that's just my thinking. Any other questions for our presenters? Oh, President Tyndall.
Just one last clarification. So I just tried to provide kind of the range that if we did only all first dollar, what the price tag would be, but yeah, any kind of assistance we think is important. And I do think that the total cost of going to school is more than tuition and fees. Everyone recognizes that because you have to leave your job and you have bills to pay. And so that's why first dollars are just more impactful, because then you get to add on the others. But just trying to be helpful.
Just one last question. Wouldn't you agree that if we just collected all the sales tax and just put it into an endowment, that would solve all of our problems? Wouldn't that be great? Just kidding. Thank you so much. We're on to public comment on higher ed tuition, college tuition for Native Americans. Would anyone like to speak on this topic? Yep, we've got Mark. Come on up. And Mark, thank you for bringing us a printed copy of your remarks too. Thank you for that.
Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair, committee members, thank you. It's good to be back again. By way of introduction, my name is Mark Harris. I'm the co-chair of the Chief Washakie Foundation and a member of the Chief Washakie Memorial Endowment Award Committee. I've served in both of those positions since their inception some 20 years ago. My comments here are really more generalizations. I have an issue. There's questions as both a funder and a presidential appointee to a UW committee. There's a number of confidentiality issues that enter into some of the things I can say and can't say. And I'm not really clear what they always are. So if there's a specific question you have, I will be glad to go back to the folks at the foundation and the president's office and make sure it's something that I'm not stepping on FERPA toes or money manager toes and share that with you. Madam Chair, first I want to say I think it's really unfortunate that someone shared information with you without doing their homework first. Their misrepresentation of the utilization of our scholarships not only harms the individual scholarships, but it calls into the question the stewardship of those scholarships and of the foundation, which is really unjustified. To clarify the utilization levels, I'd like to share a portion of an email conversation I had with John Small, the Senior Vice President for Development at the UW Foundation. And Vice President Smith, if you don't mind, he sent an email to a number of us that had some information that I think is also relevant. Mr. Small said, right up front, let me say this. The narrative that funds are going underutilized is a mistaken one. I can share immediately that the Chief Washakie Memorial Endowment is being fully utilized. I don't know the origin of this narrative, but I would like to find out and help educate whoever might be misunderstanding this. There are a number of scholarships available for Native students. Some are smaller, and each one has private donors and different selection criteria, which I still need to dig into to understand. But the big awards, Chief Washakie, Northern Arapaho, Sky People, are being well used. As of 5/31/2023, there is, and here I blanked out the number because I'm not sure if that gets into the money manager issue, was available to award to the 23-24 school year. That means we are exactly where we should be, where we would expect to be, given that fall scholarships are about to be awarded. We always want to see roughly 1 year's income available at this time of year as we start making those awards. So what I can infer here is that UW awarded everything that was available during last year's cycle, and there was no underutilization of funds. I don't think that leaves any room for doubt about how the funds are being utilized. And for those who might not have been copied on Vice President Smith's email on this topic, I'd also like to share one of his comments and expand briefly on them based on my 20 years experience with the endowment. Vice President Smith said, I am told the reason that the spent amount is slightly less than income is because of student attrition, which usually involves scholarships awarded to students who didn't end up coming to UW for whatever reason. But overall, among the individual accounts, the funds are being well utilized. In regard to his comment about student attrition, that is a real challenge for all the award committees. As you might guess, deficit spending was something I was never comfortable with, but it is really necessary to over-award on these scholarships because students do end up not showing up. And one or two students can make a big difference. I think Mr. Small sent you a conglomerate review of scholarships that are available to Native American students. There's 19 scholarships in all, and total funds available in 2023 was $193,195. Of that, $184,890 was spent. That's a difference of about $8,300, which for our scholarship, I can tell you that would be 2 to 4 students deciding not to attend. The bigger scholarships like Northern Arapahoe is a full ride scholarship. We heard just tuition is $5,900. So just one student not coming to UW could give you that $8,000 difference. So I think that small difference shows that we're really, all the scholarships are really doing a good job of trying to project what's needed, what we can actually do, and trying to match those up. And Co-Chair Oakley brought up a good question about replacement dollars, and that is a big issue. One of the things we do with the Chief Washakie Endowment is because the Northern Arapahoe Endowment does reduce by whatever else comes in because they want to cover the full burden. So we wait until, because we get applicants who have applied for both our scholarship and the Northern Arapahoe. Our normal procedure is to wait and see which students get the Northern Arapahoe Endowment. We still make an award because these awards aren't just about helping with the funding for college. I mean, that's an important part of it. But our core belief is that these students need to be recognized. One of the ways you do that is through these scholarships, and we publish the list and we have award ceremonies so that their families and those young people over in the high school over there all see that here's someone from their community. I went to school with that person last year, and look, they're getting help going to college. I could get that same help too. And that's really an important part of our scholarship program, is to recognize and reward their work and to make sure that that's recognized in the community. That's really all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer everything I can. And what I can't, I'll get you the answers.
Questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you so much for all the information you provided. Really helpful. I wish I could tell you who told me that. I can't remember. I have 1,000 conversations with
probably
people.
Don't need to know.
All righty. Thank you.
But I can tell you, if you have questions, I believe I put my number on here, my email, and you could probably track me down through the university too.
Perfect. That's why we have these hearings, to get information out there. So
thank you very much.
Any public comment on tuition costs? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Madam Co-Chair, we are just about on schedule. We're going to break for lunch. We'll come back here at 1:30.